So you were involved with that? So I had the
You were involved in the process.
Test the voice, or are we good? Test the voice from there, speak from there? Or?
If you could give me a test, that would be great.
Well, this is a test for you. Got it? Okay. Yes.
You're closer. And all my I said just so those sites can get we've got to go and find there'll be no way Have you stayed with Kidman? Really? Okay. Yeah, we normally get it's a little bit warmer looking than the salt. Various small Kill him on that.
Post on the back. Is it placed appropriately? That poster?
Yeah, I think so. I think as long as everyone can see it in the room. It's more for you, I think. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you can have our seats, that would be great.
9, well, 10 is
You would still want the generative AI to take over. Appreciate it, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Namaste. Good afternoon, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody who's listening to us online across different countries, different organizations. It's always a pleasure to be back in Melbourne, especially after scorching heat in India at this point in time. This is truly a pleasure. My name is Chetan Mehta, and I am the chairman of the ICT, which is Information, Communication and Technology sector across various countries. We have a very distinguished speakers panel today, and the panels are represented by some industry stalwarts, not only in the technology space, but across the businesses. We have included the D&I panel, Diversity and Inclusion this time, which is one of the key areas of focus around the world, not only in countries, but in different companies as well. And at the Chamber, we have taken a conscious decision to make sure that it has the center of the focus, to make sure that we have awareness and people drive a lot of focus to drive the D&I across. Today's event has been put together by a team of senior executives and members of the ICT committee, and a special mention to the CEO, Mr. Santosh, Dr. John, who's in Europe, who was not able to make it here, and all the other ICT members who were a think tank behind putting this entire event together. So I'm truly thankful to them. I would also like to thank Dr. Sushil Kumar, the Consul General, who has kindly agreed to join us for the opening remarks as well. We get tremendous support from the Indian Consulate, and the Chamber and the entire community is very thankful to you. Thank you so much. I would like to share that we have 3 moderators today. These 3 moderators come from their respective fields, and they are specialized in their own space. I would like to make sure that they introduce themselves in completeness. The first one is Ms. Sujala. She's a top 25 data scientist in Asia. She will moderate one of the panels. Mr. Richard Miller, the CEO of EMC Ventures, running the D&I panel, and Mr. Karunanda, who's the CEO of Safeview Media and also the captain of the Indian transplant team. He won 35 medals for India last year in Perth, and I think we welcome him back in Australia to see what else we can learn from him. As technology evolves each day and transforms our lives for better, it also poses a challenge for not only us as organizations, but the users of technology. While we go and use these technologies, this entire conference, the topic is generative AI and cybersecurity, bridging the gap, which means that 2 years back, we had organized a cyber summit to educate people in terms of what's happening in digital. Last year, we focused on generative AI. As we speak this year, we've combined the cyber, generative AI, and the use of technologies, not by the good actors, but the bad actors as well. How do we protect ourselves from data privacy, as well as many aspects of consumers, where the organizations protect themselves with firewalls and enormous amount of security, but the consumers like you and us are vulnerable because we are the easy target and easy access for misused technology by the bad actors. So today's conversation will be focused on many of those aspects, as well as what is being done on regulations and data security by organizations and countries so that we can look into that fact and act accordingly to embrace this technology and protect ourselves as well, including data. With that, I would like to welcome all of you and the people listening online for a very engaging conversation. I would like to invite the board member, Archie Montero, And this is not generative AI, Archie. This is only for you in a real person. I would like to invite you and welcome the rest. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chetan. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. ANZIBC is a multilateral organization that facilitates trade and business enhancements with India as its center of gravity. It now covers Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and the Middle East, with aspirations to extend to other countries. On behalf of the ANZIBC organization, may I welcome you to this signature event and welcome the Indian Consul General in Melbourne, Dr. Sushil Kumar. We were advised this morning, as you probably gathered from the flyers that you received, that there were going to be 2 ministers here today. But we were advised this morning by the officers of both the ministers that they couldn't make it because of parliamentary obligations or because the Chinese Premier Li Xiang is in town. So, apologies for not being here was their comment. A big warm welcome to members of the delegation that have come from India and overseas and interstate. We certainly have turned on the warm weather for you, having just had the coldest day in 5 years a few days ago. I would also like to welcome Mr. Ashok Mysore, the newly appointed chairman of the Confederation of Indian Industries in Australia, and the Senior VP and Regional Head Operations and Delivery for Infosys. I would also like to provide a very warm welcome to our very distinguished panelists and the moderators of those panel discussions, some of whom have come all the way from the US. I'm sure that these discussions will be insightful. I know that our ICT committee, led by Chetan Mehta, has worked very hard in putting the program together. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme of our event today is Gen AI and cybersecurity. There is also a third leg to this task, which includes diversity and inclusion, which, as you all know, is of ever great importance to leaders in the tech industry and beyond. I'm sure that these will be well canvassed further by our panels. These are some of the I'm going to focus on a few issues within the sphere of the topics today. And I'm going to start with a few poses. Will AI take our jobs and, as Elon Musk says, make human labor obsolete? Will AI enhance creativity, whereby new and improved opportunities that we have not even conceived of yet will emerge? Will AI increase productivity? Will we be working for 3 to 3.5 days a week? Is the STEM skills board that all our governments and educationists lay so much emphasis on, is that still relevant? What should our kids be studying now? The head of India's Tata Consultancy Services predicted a huge cutback on call centers, particularly as chatbots will be able to analyze and do most of the work of call centers. A cutback of call centers will have an enormous impact across Asia, particularly in countries such as India and the Philippines. Behavior and device security. Effective cybersecurity management must come from the top of the organization. A robust cybersecurity culture reinforced by regular training will ensure that every employee recognizes cybersecurity as their responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that the brief mention that I have made anything new to this knowledgeable audience. Once again, on behalf of ANZIBC, welcome and thank you. I would like to introduce now a gentleman who gives us so much of himself in the constituency that he serves. Since his appointment here nearly 2 years ago, he has endeared himself to the Indian diaspora in Victoria and Tasmania, and in Melbourne in particular. Ladies and gentlemen, the Indian Consul General, Dr. Sushil Kumar.
Namaskar. Very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you, Archie, for a wonderful introduction. I would also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we have gathered here today and pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge Mr. P. Santosh, CEO of ANZ India Business Chamber, Mr. Archie Montiro, Mr. Chetan Mehta, Chairman ICT Committee of ANZIBC, distinguished speakers for the panel today, esteemed guests, officials from Global Victoria, from government, distinguished CEO, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure and honor to join you here this afternoon for technology conference being organized by ANZ, India Business Chamber of Melbourne. I would like to thank the organizer for hosting this event on a very important theme, generative AI and cybersecurity, navigating the risks and opportunities, bridging the gap. Friends, Australia and India share a long history of partnership and friendship, built on mutual respect and shared values. We also share common geopolitical interests and strong economic complementarities. Under the visionary leaderships of both the countries, there has been a steady transformation of our bilateral ties in recent years. Last year, we have seen many high-level exchanges, including the visits by our two prime ministers. These visits from both sides have expanded our spectrum of collaboration in almost every field, be it political and strategic, defense and security, trade and investments, education and research, agriculture and water, cyber and critical technologies. Our collaboration in the realm of technology and innovation is testament to our commitment to drive progress and prosperity of both the nations. Today, as we gather here to explore the incredible potential of our collaborative efforts in the fields of technology and innovation, I am happy to see the growth of Indian IT industry in Melbourne. Australian research and innovation can find good opportunities to scale up in India. As we stand at the cusp of a new technological era, it is imperative to recognize the transformative power of technology. From artificial intelligence and blockchain of quantum computing and biotechnology, the advancements we are witnessing today have the potential to revolutionize every aspect of our lives. One of the most exciting and simultaneously challenging frontiers in technology today is Gen AI and cybersecurity. Gen AI and cybersecurity, these two domains are not just shaping our future of technology, but also redefining the very fabric of our digital society. With its ability to create content, generate realistic images, and even compose music, generative AI is pushing the boundaries of what machines can achieve. Its applications span across various industries, from entertainment to healthcare to finance and education. However, with great power comes great responsibility. The capabilities of generative AI bring forth not only opportunities but also significant challenges, especially in the realm of cybersecurity. As we embrace the innovations brought by AI, we must also be vigilant about the new threats that accompany these advancements. Cyber threats are becoming increasingly sophisticated, leveraging AI to automate attacks, create convincing deepfakes, and exploit vulnerabilities at an unprecedented scale. Given the complexity and the global nature of these challenges, collaboration between our nations is crucial. Australia and India, both leaders in technology, can greatly benefit from shared knowledge, expertise, and resources. By investing in research initiatives, we can push the boundaries of what is possible, working together to develop comprehensive policies and regulatory frameworks will ensure the ethical and secure use of emerging technologies. We need to ensure that our workforce is prepared for the challenges of tomorrow. Collaborative educational programs, exchange initiatives, and joint training sessions can help build a skilled and adaptable workforce. Today's conference is more than just a platform for discussion. Let us make this opportunity to strengthen our ties, share our knowledge, and work together towards a future where technology serves as a force for good. By combining strengths and leveraging our unique perspectives, we can drive innovation, enhance security, and create a brighter future for all. Once again, I thank ANZIBC for organizing this event and looking forward for a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. I would like to invite the first moderator, Mr. Karan Nanda. So before we get to the panel, may I invite Santosh and Dr. Kumar for a memento, please.
Just want to say a few words before that. Consulate has been extending great support to the Chamber, and this is the fourth edition of the Chamber's Technology Conference happening here in Melbourne. And the last event, the last edition was happened at the Consulate. And I have seen the kind of energy that we are getting the Consulate, and he has always been a great support to the Chamber. On behalf of all of us, I would like to present a memento now. Chetan also, you can sit down.
Thank you, Santosh. With that, we'll move to the first panel. May I invite Mr. Karan Nanda, who's the first moderator, Ms. Sonia Allen, Mr. Robert McCurry, and Mr. Kiran O'Meara. Over to you, Karan.
Namaskar and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have quite a long speech, but I'll try to make it short. So, welcome to this very, very interesting session on Bridging the Gap. Like Chetan introduced, I'm Karan Nanda, your moderator for today. And it is my pleasure to guide you through this fascinating present and future evolutions in AI. In our rapidly advancing digital world, the rise of artificial intelligence has brought about transformative benefits in a lot of sectors. Me being a transplant recipient, I'm following AI evolution in the medical sciences, and it's absolutely fascinating. However, as with any powerful tool, it can be wielded for both constructive and destructive purposes. Generative AI in particular is a double-edged sword. While it holds potential to innovate and solve complex problems, it also presents significant challenges, especially in the realm of cybersecurity. Today, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment. Cyber threats are evolving in an unprecedented pace, and generative AI is key in this evolution. Threat actors are leveraging AI to craft sophisticated phishing attacks, develop evasive malware, and automate large-scale cyber assaults. These AI-driven threats are more personalized, more adaptive, and more difficult to detect, posing severe risks to our digital infrastructure and data security. The question before us is not whether AI will be used, it already is, but how can we effectively bridge the gap between these emerging threats and our defense mechanisms? To navigate this landscape, we must adopt a proactive and multifaceted approach. We would need advanced threat detection and response systems provided by this AI. These systems can analyze vast amounts of data in real time, identify anomalies, and respond to incidents faster than traditional methods. By automating routine security tasks, AI should free up human analysts to focus on more complex threat and strategic decision making. Predictive analytics and threat intelligence would be essential. AI can help us foresee potential attacks by analyzing historical data and current trends. This allows us to prepare and strengthen our defenses before threats materialize. Furthermore, AI can aggregate threat intelligence from diverse sources, giving us a comprehensive view of threat landscape. Another critical aspect is enhancing our human capabilities. AI can augment the efforts of security professionals, providing them with actionable insights and reducing the noise from false positives. This improves efficiency and ensures that attention is directed where it is most needed. Moreover, robust authentication and identity management systems are crucial. AI-driven solutions can offer adaptive solutions, authentication mechanisms, enhancing security without compromising user experience. Biometric systems, for instance, can provide secure and convenient ways to verify identity. Lastly, we must foster collaboration and information sharing. AI can facilitate secure sharing of threat intelligence across organizations and sectors, creating a unified defense front against cyber threats. Collaborative platforms and ethical AI governance frameworks are vital in ensuring that we harness AI's potential responsibly and transparently. While generative AI poses significant cyber threat, it also offers us powerful tools to counteract these dangers by embracing AI for defense, enhancing our human capabilities, and fostering collaboration. We can bridge the gap and build a resilient cybersecurity framework. I would like to now introduce again our panel. I will start with Sonia. Sonia Eland is Executive Vice President and Country Leader for HCL. Robert Marchiori is CEO Cognizant. We've had you before, welcome back. We have Kiran Umera, CIO Software and IT at Telstra. So let me start the questions now. And this, I'll start with, this is the first question. We'll all answer this first question. It's an interesting question. Given the pace of events today, it will take bad actors possibly 60 minutes to exploit a vulnerability by 2026. Versus today, it takes the Western world to detect and remediate an incident between 4 to 7 days. How do you think we can bridge this gap? And I'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me here today. I think you touched on
a lot of it in your opening, actually. I look at three key pillars, and they're the same pillars that have been in place for dozens of years, which is information sharing, technology, and then education. So when you look at security, going back, I think if you take the first one, information sharing, establishing organizations that can share information across threats are becoming more and more critical. So I think before we even look at what technology it is and how quickly it's moving, that organizations where the CISOs of the various corporations, the various companies of the world, the various industries can share information becomes more and more critical. So that just puts more increased pressure on making sure that those organizations are there so that threats can be shared in real time because there's not really a competitive advantage there. You want to protect consumers and you need to be able to have that open, transparent sharing of information. I think the second pillar is technology, which is the one that is probably more directly referenced to your question, but there's always a great leveling with technology, as you referenced. Once a technology is available, whether you try to keep it inside or not, the assumption is everyone will have access to that. So it's a matter of how do we apply it, continuing to invest in making sure that we are investing to take the latest technologies and be able to use those to offset the bad actors who are using it against. So the good news is this has been going on since the beginning of warfare. There's always going to be technology, whether it was some weapons used in the medieval time, or now we're talking about AI. Once those become available, you have to think of this as warfare to use those. Google, probably about 6-7 years ago at this point, when they were doing some of the initial research into AI before the generative craze, they did their Go model for the Go game, and they created Go, they trained it, and it could beat a human within a couple weeks of training. Then they created something called AlphaGo, which employed the adversarial model, so that Go, the original, played AlphaGo in an adversarial model, and within 15 minutes, AlphaGo could beat the original Go, just hands down, which was the best Go player in the world. But my point is that was a leveler, because at that point, it was not an advantage anymore. So it's a matter of us investing in adversarial systems, etc. And then I think as long as we're doing that, the threat's there. And the last one, the final one, is really education, and especially consumer education. You referenced in the beginning how the bad actors are realizing that instead of going up against, say, a Telstra that's got incredible investment in their security of their network and their frameworks around that, it's a lot easier to social engineer the consumers. And so I think AI can play a big role there. We can maybe talk about it in another question. But I think us figuring out ways to help protect the consumers and investing in their protection will be the next really big battle.
I think so, yeah. Hi everyone, and yeah, thank you for having me. I think just to add and build a little bit on what Rob said, I think for me first and foremost is, given where we are, it's inevitable that it will happen. And so that has to be your mindset going into the work in front of us. So if you're not already sitting with your board, and that is not already the number one risk that the board discusses, and it is not already the number one priority before you think about the next new thing that you might invest in, then it should be. Right? So certainly from our perspective, the number one risk as an organisation now, when we sit with the ARC, is our cyber position and how exposed or not we are. And we've recently taken a very explicit decision top down, given the movement you've described and the pace of change, that quite literally before $1 of capital is spent on a new feature, a new product, a new customer experience, or a productivity initiative, we have to be satisfied that we've done everything possible on the cyber front. And that's how I like to talk to my team about it, which is, we don't want to be in a position where we're looking back on this, asking ourselves the question, did we do everything possible? You should be here now asking yourself the question, have I done everything possible to mitigate the inevitable? But it is the inevitable. Which I think brings me to the second point, which is, If you're not already, then I would war game and practice the breach. And as you think about that, what's interesting is containment strategies surface. So given it's inevitable, and given how we're thinking about architecture now and management of data, how can I contain and limit the blast radius of a given exposure and get very proactive about that? So when you think about defence in depth as a strategy, and you think about your cyber posture more generally, how do I then think about containment of my data so that when I do have a breach, that breach is as contained and as low impact as possible? How do I think about my architecture in a way where wherever I have a breach, it's as contained as possible? And techniques like zero trust and various other things are well established, but if these things are not already a reality in your organisations, then I would say they need to be raised in priority very quickly. A bit like Rob said before, I think many of the techniques and the tools exist. My provocation would be that it hasn't had sufficient priority. We haven't held the discipline that we need to, and so this is holding us to a higher standard than ever before on well-tried and tested practices that have existed for quite some time. Maybe the one addition to that is Gen AI in itself does present this increased risk, but it also presents the increased opportunity for behavioural pattern detection. And so those techniques can be employed to try and mitigate against some of the more sophisticated identity attacks. But at this point, even with all that technology change, I do agree with Rob's point about social engineering. I consider that still to be the #1 risk for most organisations, beyond even the acceleration of the AI being employed in the attack vectors.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I'm just thinking what to add to what you guys have said. I mean, I definitely think the weakest link is still us humans, for sure. And how the more that we can do to train, educate, enable, detect the human failure or predict the human failure even, I think that that's still a really important part of containing. It's really us and what we're doing about people. The fact that the multi-modal AI, Gen AI that's around, I mean, it's clever. I mean, it's crazy clever to see what bad actors can create with that technology. And it's so realistic, it's so believable, and so it's so easy to just, for a human, to just believe it. And so I think that's definitely, in my mind, there's still the front layer of what needs to be protected. I think from an organisation point of view, I mean, it's absolutely, I think most organisations are taking this seriously. It's probably just how mature they are in their response to it. There's certainly lots of activity and money and people and tech and just like everything's kind of being thrown at it. But how well organised is it? I think it's like everybody's just throwing stuff at it because it's urgent, because it's audit risk committee and we've got to do something. So I do think there's lots of activity happening. So I was thinking about your 3 pillars. The other way is just to think about the sort of, aspects of an operating model, right? I think whether it's, people, process, technology, channels, your layers of an operating model, I think we're not seeing operating models change. So we're seeing all of the spend on people, so lots of contractor workforce or, however the people's being spent, lots of technology, but are the operating models changing? Because I think that the way in which the bad actors can infiltrate, combined with the fact that technology, your ecosystem is so expanded beyond the walls of your organisation, whether it's, literally not just cloud and on-premise, but just all of your connected value chain that's now connected by technology. And I think it really means you have to think differently about the operating model of not just of your whole business, but as it pertains to even managing cyber risk. And so I think that we're still seeing a lot of money being spent, a lot of activity, but not necessarily changes in operating model, which I think kind of connects back to your point around, I think the more mature organisations are really thinking about it top down quite differently. Their teams are set up differently, they're wargaming it differently. You're starting to see different things,
You're
and
absolutely
so I think that's probably where, if you think about bridging the gap, I mean, it's about operating model, I think, because I think there's lots of spend. It's just,
Yes.
how is it coming together? And it's probably around operating model and how you organise your business.
Absolutely. I think you're right. This is the only disruption which has a benefit to the incumbents, because, like you said, the more data you throw at it, the more intelligent it gets. So it's interesting. The incumbents actually have an advantage here. So, all right. My next question is for Kieran. Multiple layers of banks and other organizations are required to deploy AI. What are the inherent challenges and how are they being addressed?
Deploying AI is a choice. I don't think anyone has to deploy AI. It's still a choice. But multiple challenges. So I think as I touched on before a little bit, the basic discipline and foundation still apply. So good data management, good architecture, secure code, secure workforce, education, all those things. And like we touched on before, I think the little bit around the discipline and those things has to be more tightly held than it was in the past. The priority needs to be higher and so on. Beyond that then, and this is well documented already, we talk about hallucinations, we talk about data exposures, increased risk, we talk about the opportunity for error, catastrophic interference, all of these things are still a reality, and of course that then means you somehow have to police this and assure yourself that the outcomes are what you expect. And so that then implies within the organisation you have to find ways to govern, manage, and have policies in practice. And simple examples, certainly in our world, we've got examples where over time we've accumulated lots of data. But given that landscape, should we keep that data? And to your point before, the more data, the more exposure, the incumbent benefits. So there's a very deliberate push now. One defence mechanism is, well, do we actually need that data? Should we get rid of that data? Should we purge that data from our systems? So that's one. Second is then, from a policy and framework perspective, where we've accepted in the past a level of risk because we had certain controls in place, we had compensating controls, maybe to compensate for the fact that there might be a PII exposure because some employee decides to create a little project SharePoint, put some information on the SharePoint, and then we forget about it. But that's okay because it's outside our firewalls and, right? Lots of reasonable reasons. So I think those reasonable reasons now no longer hold true. And therefore, the standard by which we hold ourselves to account on the privacy and data management have to be higher again. And there's accepted frameworks for this that you can employ across the organisation, like essentially, where we look at those types of controls or PI masking and so on. So I think there's a lot of work to do across many organisations because of that accumulation over successive years where those risks exist. And in the past, where that SharePoint site was okay, it's contained within your firewall, no longer true. So we have to defend against that. Then you move into, so beyond that, just because the AI exists and I can use Gen AI, maybe I shouldn't. And my favourite example of this is one where, so a US-based software vendor of ours very excitedly showcased an example using Gen AI in a customer-facing use case to explain a very complex telco billing example, right? And the classic use case was the customer's really confused, but it's okay because the AI can explain the bill. Well, that's fantastic. But if it requires AI to explain the bill, then we got the product construct wrong in the first place, right? So just because I can use the AI doesn't mean I should, and I think that's the next major focus where we need to hold that discipline again, which is we risk an awful lot of AI sprawl and the costs getting out of control. Just because it exists, it all consumes GPUs, and GPUs cost more than CPUs. And my experience certainly is, to this point, the business case might stack up in theory, the productivity might be there logically, but can I really exit the humans, or can I really exit the cost, or can I really realise those benefits? And I think so far in many cases the answer is no. And it's an interesting debate about, you know, will AI take our jobs? I don't subscribe to that point of view personally. If I think about closest to my own world and how we're using LLMs right now in architecture or solution design or the coding world, the coding environment, it's making people more efficient, it's not replacing the people. So I'm adding net cost, I'm not saving yet. Or if I'm saving, it's indirect and I can't monetize it. So I think that's a challenge we have to think through more directly. Beyond that, then it gets interesting into adoption. And again, for me, there's two worlds in this. There is the adoption inside of the organisation where, say, inside my engineering organisation, adoption varies according to age. It was a little bit interesting, you know, listening to demographics before. The tenured engineers don't like it. And in fact, I've had very senior principal engineers tell me, I feel dirty, it's cheating, right? And so there's this cultural thing that we have to get past where it's not okay to use the AI because it somehow makes me a lesser engineer. The more junior staff, of course, benefit, they can get up the learning curve quicker, which is great. But there is that cultural element. What does it mean for me as a human? How does it impact me? How does it impact the value I provide to the organisation? Which I think we haven't even begun to think about yet in terms of how we manage that cultural change. And then in the front line, similar, intelligence demographic is not the millennials, not the, what's the one after millennials? I forget. The young ones. The Gen Zs, right? So that's not typically our demographic. But if they are the most receptive to this technology as a way of servicing them, that's fantastic. But that's not my main demographic, and so how do I get the adoption in that cohort? So I think at multiple levels there's, you know, whether it's in the architecture, getting the fundamentals right, whether it's in the, you know, being the very intentional rollout of where I should or not use it, considering the cost, how I get the payback. And a little bit like, you know, when cloud first went through that hype cycle many years ago of, you know, cloud's going to be cheaper and it's going to be fabulous. Hands up who still thinks cloud is cheaper, just out of interest, right? So I think Gen AI is the next version of that, and so we need to get in front of that economic cycle now so we don't find ourselves in a situation where we're scratching our heads going, oh, maybe actually premise-based compute is cheaper, maybe I need a hybrid strategy or multi-cloud strategy. So there's a lot to think through there.
Thank you. So yeah, I'll come back to you. How will AI lead in critical decision making across the customer base, and what are the risks associated for incorrect decision making?
Need I mention robo-debt? It's quite critical and catastrophic decisions if you get it, impacts if you get that wrong. I think, you know, it's really, obviously these are great tools, like in terms of understanding the data and what it can tell you, the insights, patterns, inference that you can make that you can actually then apply to actually deliver amazing, relevant, timely, personalised customer services. Of course you want to be able to use this technology. I mean, your competitors will be. You need to. I mean, I think you would be mad to not be using it. But I think you really have to have, you know, a lot of, you know, I worry about things like who's training, who's building these models and who's training, what bias is in there. I mean, there are so many horror stories around what goes wrong just with early beta releases of, you know, Gen AI into the world and having to quickly retract it. It's ongoing and very public, and so I suppose you don't want to be one of those headlines. So, you know, thinking about how you can manage the bias. Bias exists. Whoever's on that team that's building it is bringing that bias. It's not something they can even do anything about necessarily. So how do you have a governance process, an ethical kind of process around how you're understanding and building up your models, I think will be really important. And I think you as a company that's, you know, caring about your brand, you'll be wanting to start right at that stage and making sure that, you know, what's going into these models is actually, you know, you're feeling a level of comfort around, you know, how they're being trained. I mean, then you've got the data that's going into there. So, I mean, people are saying you should only use ChatGPT and tell it pre-2023, so that you don't use any data after 2023 because it's all crap. So, you know, it's fake data. I mean, it's all the data that was created by people testing ChatGPT in the first place. So, and it was telling them to do all sorts of stupid things, and now that's the data that's in the world. So, I mean, I think, you know, I mean, that's just one example of how much rubbish data there must be that's really recently been created, let alone all the rubbish data that always existed. So, I mean, I think, you know, making sure that you really have control over, like, how do you have control over what data is going in? Obviously, you've got the privacy concerns, you've got concerns around, you know, who owns the data, all of that kind of part of the governance. And then, of course, what's it generating? Well, what are the recommendations that have been generated? And how do you know, obviously we know there's hallucinations and all sorts of things. So I think humans in the loop and governance guardrails all the way through are going to need to be implemented. And I think that they're the jobs, you know, unless you're, you know, super technical and building this tech in the first place, these are the other jobs that humans can be doing, right? Because at the end of the day, that's the judgment and critical thinking and judgment we can apply to what's going on. But I think that they're the things that need to be brought to the table in order to give, at least coming back to the Audit Risk Committee, how are we managing what we're creating and producing, I think, because no doubt we need to be using this type of technology for delivering, you know, basically ultimately amazing customer experiences. But I think it's making sure we think about as we, you know, because at the moment there's lots of testing and experimentation and prototyping and small little kind of end-to-end, you know, slices of things going into production so that you can see how it works. But again, it also comes back to my comment before on operating model. All of those things is like changing the way you run your business. So, you know, there's some really base foundational elements that need to come in to make this work. And I kind of bring it back to what's the entire operating model of your business and the governance framework around that will, you know, and now that's actually a really hard thing to do. It's kind of quite easy to do IT projects in isolation of thinking about that. Then you start to think about how do you actually change your business. That's actually really hard to do. So.
Interesting. You also mentioned the customer experience. So how do you think that is improving, and how are you going about retaining those customers in terms of a better experience?
Well, I mean, the good news is that you know, it's already been used today to great effect. I mean, I think things like customer service is the early use case that's, you know, well and truly being used by many organisations in terms of supporting, complementing and supporting agents, or, you know, on the phone or on the chat, however it is. So I think the good news is there's lots of case studies around how that's already improving customer experience. I think, you know, if we're talking about external customers, I do think that there'll always be this place for people to talk to people and engage with people. And I'm sort of thinking that as the costs go down of, you know, how many people are required, put it that way, because there will be a whole lot of things that will be automated, right? That never require or get picked up, incidents that get picked up before it's an incident, put it that way, so that it never becomes one, so that nobody ever has to call in the first place. So I'm imagining that a lot of things from that AI will be able to pick up a lot of those things. So call volumes would reduce, for example, such that you need less people, but those people that you have are doing really complex, you know, explaining the bill, you have the ability to then have people have the time to work on those complex cases where people want to speak to people, I think. It's the very nature of humans. We like
Excellent. Yes.
dealing with other people.
Absolutely, you're right. All right, we move on to Rob. Core platforms and Gen AI's deployment. Is it deployable with speed across, or data availability limitations, like Sonia also mentioned, that there's a lot of crap data also going. So how are we going to go about that?
Yeah, so if you look at AI deployment, I had a conversation about a month ago with the CIO of a very large corporate here in Australia. I'll save the name, not Kieran. And he was explaining to me how they're at the absolute cutting edge of AI. He had 176 proof of concepts underway, 212 in the pipeline. They had this amazing investment. So Rob, I don't really need any of your help with AI. We're all set. It's a lot of proof of concepts. Do you have anything driving results in production? No, we're getting to that. I said, you're mid-pack at best, probably in the bottom quartile. If this has moved so quickly compared to kind of past waves, that's the big difference. Same exact arc, but it's moving quicker. I mean, LLMs, I'll say hit the mainstream, certainly weren't invented about 14 months ago. And already we are seeing significant results in production deployments, I think especially around operations, especially around customer service, probably a little bit less in the kind of front-end pieces. I think those are coming. So what has been happening, and what actually companies like ourselves, Cognizant, are working on is really that last mile. So you've got the LLMs. The LLMs largely last year were you had OpenAI, et cetera, using these large data sets. But the real value is taking the LLMs and training them with your own data in the enterprise. How do you do that? And so we're working on wrapping LLMs with the data access rights you need, the ability to ingest the data, the ability to have traceability around the data. All of those tools we're getting pretty good at in terms of how to be able to deploy LLMs. And there's all kinds of LLMs. So much press gets taken up by the Gemini at Google and the others. The real interesting piece is you're starting to really see industry-specific LLMs developed around legal, around the claims industry and insurance, for instance. You can go around. This is one big difference with generative AI and LLMs is really applicable anywhere you have language. By the way, that could be C# if you're a developer, because that's a language, or it could be English, or it could be anywhere else. So I think the ability to deploy it is accelerating faster than previous waves. Where I think a lot of the interesting problems that haven't been solved yet are more in the area of IP. Who's going to own the IP that's generated? What are the legal frameworks around who owns the content which is generated? You've got questions around trust. How do you trust the data? Sure, as we're wrapping these LLMs, we're working on traceability and other things, but by the very nature of them being creative, they work on a probability model. You can't, by definition, predict exactly what's going to come out of them, or else you'd be back to the old model of if this, then that. And that's kind of not what they are by their very nature. So figuring out how we are going to come up with frameworks around legal, around risk, around trust, I think that's where the deployment is going to start to hit more of a hurdle. Licensing, licensed content, who owns the rights to it, etc. That's where I see the big kind of more of a break coming. I think in terms of the technology to deploy, long way to go, as I said, but definitely making progress. And in narrow use cases, you can drive huge results already today, and we're already seeing that. So I think, shifting out of thinking about kind of use cases and proof of concepts in moving towards how you're going to drive actual results is kind of where it needs to go. And I think, to Kieran, in your point, just being very deliberate about where you're going to use it. It's very tempting to use it everywhere because, again, you can come up with 212 use cases and you can proof of concept them all. But I really highly doubt that out of all of those, the actual value is being driven in them, especially if you take into consideration kind of the full operating cost of it. So, yeah, I think making progress faster than past waves, but I really do think legal risk and those other frameworks around it is what's going to put a bit of a handbrake on this as we enter the next couple of years.
Thank you. So possibly moving towards precision AI
Yes.
at some point.
Yeah.
All right. Different question, but back to you, Robert. What is the plan to upskill people in the industry, and how do we differentiate creating hype versus value?
Yeah. Kind of two facets of it. There's always been, but I do think it's more pronounced with AI and generative AI technologies. When you talk about shifting the workforce, you look at how do you educate the workforce so that they understand the tools and take most advantage of it. You've got those who are going to be building the models and the tools, and then you've got those who are going to be using them. And there's such a good use case around generative AI, and that is its big differentiator, that it's just much more natural to interact with these. It's much more human friendly, especially once we get going. It's not it's not on a keyboard, it's not in a foreign language where you have to learn stuff and really get heavily trained. So I think you're going to need to double down on two fronts. On the one front, there's going to be more and more specialization on the ability to create, deploy the models, and LLMs is just one facet of generative AI. We're going to see the next waves coming over the course of the next 2 to 3 years that is going to go well beyond kind of large language models. So when it comes to the workforce, I think really the interesting piece is probably less about, I'm very interested in it because that's our business, training the technologists and the engineers to be able to build and create better, safer, more secure tools. But I do think the workforce is going to see a large shift in terms of those who are using the tools more so than previous waves, more so than, say, cloud. Interacting with a generative model, augmenting the job you do. I think that's the use cases that I like best, is how it helps to augment you, not replace what you're doing. That means that you have to come back to understanding the business problem. So I think there has to be this continued shift towards, really, do you know what your customer wants? Do you know what your business is trying to achieve? And then you have the skills to translate that into leveraging the models to help you do your job better and faster. That's a whole different mindset that is there, I think, in a very small part of the population, but I think to succeed in the next 5 years, if you look 5 years out, that's going to be a core skill set to be able to really understand your customer, understand your business. Right now, there has been a big shift to understanding customer, but it's still probably relegated towards design thinking, and if you look at the kind of entire workforce, a smaller piece of the workforce, I think that's just going to be top to bottom, from a customer service agent up to a senior manager, up to an executive, and everything in between. You're really going to need to understand how to use these tools, because again, it's not a tool that's specific. It can help an executive make decisions. It can help a customer service agent deal with a customer. It can help a developer develop code. So it's going to be pretty pervasive, but at the end of the day, it's going to make it easier for people to take their business problem and their customer problems they're trying to solve. So I think the shift in the workforce is making sure that we're figuring out how do we train people in customer, in understanding the customer and design thinking in these types of disciplines, so that they can apply them and leverage these tools we're going to be giving them. Big shift though coming. If I knew the entire shift to the workforce, as they say, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. But it's going to be quite impactful.
Thank you. Kieran, what's the impact anticipated in productivity with Gen AI?
7% of GDP over the next 10 years.
Whoa.
Goldman Sachs said so. Or maybe it's 2.6 to 4.4 trillion annually, according to McKinsey. Or maybe it's 20% of me today. Maybe it's 40% of my IT budget for Run and Operate with my friend Rob here, who should be in the press, right? Because part of our strategy, of course, is that. I think it's highly contextual and dangerous to generalise, and there's too much of that in the industry right now. And so one of the things that keeps me busy right now is trying to convince all of my leaders that there isn't an instantaneous 40% reduction in the cost of technology on the 1st of July. Thank you, Microsoft. So I think it is dangerous to generalise, and I think we talk about productivity, we don't talk about value erosion, and I think it's another two sides of that sword you mentioned before. I think value erosion, particularly where, so close to home in the software world, I think there is a reality for many people that the value of a task today will be eroded, and so that has interesting implications. Yes, it will make some recipients of those services more productive, but it does present a different challenge. I think that that will inevitably lead to other ways to employ that capacity. So if I stay within the realms of my own world, you know, one of those proof of concepts we did do was we posed the question, do we think we could automate our architects? Do we think we could take solution designers out of the loop? And so we ran a trial on that, and of course we were able to train an LLM on our standards, on our engineering standards, on our architectural standards, on our data, and we can indeed generate solution design, and we can indeed generate key design documents, and we can indeed automate cyber approvals and so on and so forth. That does not mean now that, back to my earlier point, I no longer need to employ those architects. What it does mean is that all of those other things in the backlog that we couldn't get to yet because they were doing that work are now all of a sudden a possibility. And so I think it will create lots of value in that sense, where the tasks that we've not been able to get to in the past are now possible. That human in the loop, important, but now I as an individual am at least 20% more efficient, or 40%, or 4.4 trillion annually more efficient, depending on whose numbers you believe. But I think the productivity is one side of it, offset by the cost of those GPUs. And then we have to focus more, I think, where the more meaningful conversation is where is the additional value creation, because now all of that capacity you just created, you have to do something with it. So where do I direct that? And particularly for those services or those industries that see value erosion in the value of a task, that's a more urgent priority, I think. Certainly within the software industry, I think that's an absolute priority. For a company like Telstra, that creates opportunities in our products and services that we take to market in ways we haven't had the opportunity in the past. And now all of a sudden we've got more capacity to experiment with our customers there. And so I think as much as productivity is, flavour of the month right now and on everyone's minds, we should turn our attention to value creation and looking at the more immediate opportunities there.
Excellent, thank you. So we come to our final question. I think Chetan is giving me some looks. Get on with it. This is for all of us. We'll start with you, Sonia. Can generative AI deliver the potential to change anatomy of work as it augments the capabilities of individual workers with automation?
Yeah, definitely. There's your quick answer. But as the panel's been talking about, it's whether you believe Elon Musk and Sam Altman's manifesto of the post-labor economics kind of world. I mean, maybe one day in the future. Who knows? I don't know how far away that would be, but I do think it's a long way away because just there's so many constraints that are, in the way of the utopian kind of Moore's law. Like there's just too many constraints on, is there enough energy? Is there enough hardware? Is there enough data centers? Is there enough regulation? I mean, who knows? There's so many constraints. So I do think that we will have jobs for a while longer, for sure. And in terms of augmented workforce, I mean, 100%. I think there will be these persona-based kind of multimodal, Gen AI chatbots or whatever you want to call them. I'm not quite sure the format they'll take, but I can see them existing because they kind of already exist today, right? So I think they'll be created by persona depending on the type of role that you do. So like we were saying, whether you're an executive or you're a coder or you're anywhere in between, I can imagine these persona kind of based tools existing. I mean, the interesting thing is training people to use them so they actually know how to use them will be fascinating because, again, depending on the age group as to whether they take to it like a duck to water or completely resist it and feel dirty, and everything in between as to how long that takes. And the other interesting thing is talking about the value of the tasks. Like, it's going to be doing so many tasks that you might have had a team, if you're a leader, you might have had a team of people helping you with a number of those tasks, and now you have a augmented, support that's doing that versus a team. So you then go, well, what happens to that team? I mean, that's kind of interesting. I'm not quite sure I know the answer of what happens to that team. I'm sure you've got to think about deploying. A lot of those will be more junior people entering the workforce. So it's definitely an interesting problem to ponder, what happens to sort of younger people entering the workforce when possibly those jobs might not exist because managers have their augmented self to do those tasks now. So, but new jobs always get created. Technology disruption has just always proven that. So whilst I might not be able to fully imagine what the new job is, I'm completely confident a new job will be created for those people. So, it's kind of a long way of answering all that question, but there's a lot. It's an exciting time. It's definitely an exciting time, but I do think training people to adopt this technology and actually use it effectively, that will be an interesting process in of itself. I mean, there's a whole job there to train people to use it. So, yeah.
Kieran.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think it already has changed the anatomy of the workforce in very material ways. And I also agree there'll be new opportunities created. In fact, you only have to look at the jobs boards to see that. In software, it was all about being an analyst programmer once upon a time. You never see that role advertised anywhere anymore. Everyone wants to be a product engineer or a prompt engineer or a data scientist. So that reality is here now already. For those who have self-selected and adopted the tools, they are already working in different ways. I am already adopting the tools to some extent and working personally in different ways to get through the day faster and cheat. I do feel like I'm cheating, if I'm honest. So I think it's a reality now. It has already. It will continue to evolve. I don't subscribe to we're all going to be redundant. I mean, if you believed Elon would have self-driving cars by now. So I think his ability to forecast is a little bit off. Maybe it will come, but not yet. And I personally think it's quite interesting. It's quite exciting. And I think somebody posed the question earlier, what would you recommend your kids do for a living these days? Well, I have 3 kids, and I tell them, be creative or go into tech. It hasn't changed. Or ideally, be creative and go into tech. Right? Because the creativity, I don't think, can be substituted. And back to that point about where is the value, if we turn our attention to where is the value, then leveraging the toolkits, the LLMs and so on, then we create more value faster. And so the creativity combined with the tech skill set, I think, is the golden nugget.
So you're cheating but not feeling dirty yet.
I 100% believe it'll be a job creator. I think you look to the past, and I don't think there's a fundamentally different. So just 2 a little more obvious but quick examples. I mean, you go back to some of the classic case studies around something like the Gutenberg press, just massive impact on society. But if you look back and you look at the studies around the time, I mean, the dissemination of information created the world we live in today. I mean, at the time, it was seen as blasphemy. It was gonna change the world for the worse, and I definitely believe it changed the world for the positive. If you look at the Industrial Revolution, the example I always like is the sewing machine. It's just had massive impact on the Industrial Revolution. And if you look at what happened was completely different from what they thought. They went, okay, we're gonna create sewing machines, and that's going to change kind of the domestic households. But what nobody predicted at the time, it seems obvious now, was that it created a textile industry. Because at the time, the sewing machine was people doing sewing was in the home. And that created a whole industry by figuring out how to put it in a factory, power them centrally, and generate the textile industry, which made the demand for clothing and textiles go up 1,000-fold because they could produce it. I mean, both of those, I do think AI will have a profound impact, but I think we have always figured out how to make that ultimately more productive. And where we started the day was around bad actors, and we've kind of come full circle. Sure, there will be bad actors. There will be people who are going to try to use this for not good reasons. There's going to be a push to try to optimize and eliminate jobs, but the greater force will be job creation. I think the greater force will be the good that it can do, and yeah, it's up to all of us to make that happen. But I think that's what's going to happen.
Thank you. Okay, so quick conclusion. Chetan, I'll take maybe 2 more minutes. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we draw this insightful session to a close, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the discussions we've had about Gen AI as a both formidable cyber threat and a powerful cybersecurity tool. The rapid advancement of AI technology has revolutionized the way we understand and respond to cyber threats. On one hand, generative AI has empowered malicious actors with sophisticated tools to launch highly personalized phishing attacks. Yet, we have the ability, or seem to be having the processes in order to contain them. Bridging this gap requires a multifaceted approach, integrating advanced technologies, proactive strategies, ethical considerations. Let's quickly summarize the key takeaways. Leveraging AI for defense, predictive analytics and threat intelligence, augmenting human capabilities, robust authentication and identity management, collaboration and information sharing, ethical and transparent AI practices. In conclusion, while generative AI presents significant challenges as a cybersecurity threat, it also offers powerful tools. By integrating AI into our cybersecurity strategies, we can enhance threat detection, automate responses, and improve overall security posture. However, it is crucial to approach AI deployment with a commitment to ethical practices, transparency, and collaboration. Thank you for your attention and active participation. Let us move forward with the insights gained today, striving to build resilient and adaptive cybersecurity frameworks that are well equipped to face the challenges of tomorrow. Have a great day and stay secure. Thank you.
Richard, can we have you on the stage, please? Richard, may I request Ms. Gulshan, Louisville, and Ms. Gretchen Scott, please.
All right, good afternoon, and thank you very much for having us. And so our next session will focus on diversity inclusion. By way of introduction, my name is Richard Miller. I'm the CEO of ANZIBC Ventures. I'm a fintech advisor and investor, and absolutely thrilled to be hosting or moderating this afternoon's panel on diversity and inclusion. So you might ask what diversity and inclusion has to do with AI and cyber. And we will talk about model bias in a bit, but speaking with Chetan and the organizers in preparation for this, I think it may have more to do with the second part of the title for this conference, navigating risks and challenges and bridging the gap. Because when it comes to diversity and inclusion, we know that this is a critical issue for leaders in technology. We know that leaders know that performance, retention, risk management, innovation are all improved in a diverse environment where employees feel included. So we're making progress in this space, especially in multicultural Australia. In fact, just last year, 2023, for the first time in over 100 years, more than 30% of the population of Australia was not actually born in Australia. But that doesn't always mean that we all feel welcome all the time. In terms of gender diversity, progress is also being made, with the share of women on ASX-listed boards climbing from 8.3% in 2009 to 35.6% in 2023. But the tech workforce is still only 28% female, and women make up less than 1 in 4 IT graduates. Similarly, representation and inclusion of LGBTIQ+, First Nations, disabled people, and other historically marginalized groups can pose challenges for leaders with even the best of intentions. So, there is still a gap to bridge, both in our workplaces and in our understanding of these issues. So here to help us with that today are our 3 amazing panelists. So first, immediately next to me is Luella Lyons. She's the portfolio performance lead for group payments at ANZ Bank, where she focuses on measuring performance and uplifting leadership capability across teams both in Australia and in Bangalore. Immediately next to her, we have Gulshan Singh, who is the Executive Manager, Payments Policy and Advocacy at the Commonwealth Bank. And she also sits on the bank's Diversity and Inclusion Council. So she brings a depth of experience in government relations and policy, as well as in working with groups external to the bank focused on gender diversity, such as Women in Payments and Money 2020. And to the far side, we have Gretchen Scott, the CEO of Kaleida, a tech startup that provides technology-specific career growth platform for building diverse and inclusive teams. She's also a proud coder and entrepreneur, and also leads Women Who Code Melbourne, which is a group focused on, obviously, tech women in this space. So I also just want to note that our panelists are here in a personal capacity, so whilst their perspectives are informed by their professional experience, they're not here as representatives of their employers or representatives, spokespeople for them. So I really just want to get right into the discussion. So maybe, Luella, I can start with you. What does diversity and inclusion mean to you, and why is it important?
Thanks, Richard. Diversity and inclusion for me is about the feeling of being respected and valued in any of my unique perspectives that I bring to the table, whether that's at work or in life. This is really imperative for me to function as a human being at work, and as well as my personal life, because I love learning from various groups of people, understanding different perspectives, and those different types of perspectives allow me to do the work that I do and allow me to be a mum and allows me to live the life. So it's really important to have that respect and that feeling of being welcomed and valued at anything that I bring to the table on a professional capacity.
So to me, diversity and inclusion is about creating an environment in which everyone's differences are accepted and are valued. And that's any differences, whether it's cultural background or gender or sexuality. And that's because those differences are valuable to companies. So the session earlier talked about creativity, just talked about the commercial benefits of diversity, and logically, if you think about it, if you bring together a group of people with very different perspectives, you're going to have a lot more innovation and better decision making than if you bring a group together of people who have all the same lived experience. And at the Commonwealth Bank, we try to have our employee base reflect our customer base, because that means we better understand our customers and their needs, and we're in a better position to serve them and design products and services for them.
It's always disastrous to be the third or the end of the panel. Sonny, you had that before. I can talk to this in terms of technology quite well. I think at the moment all of us would recognise that technology is the infrastructure of our existence. I mean, roads and cars, yes, but every day we're banging into technology. And if people building that technology don't represent the kaleidoscope of people consuming it, to your point, then we're missing market opportunities and potentially just building really dangerous tooling or systems or structures. So I think diversity and inclusion in technology is just critical. And it's about that piece of not just bringing diverse people into the room, but including them so they stay.
Awesome. So I think we will touch on a couple of those topics as we go on. But I want to talk a little bit about the context in which we are. I think we all recognize the importance of diversity and inclusion and the fact that it has multiple and diverse facets in and of itself. It's sometimes a little hard to wrap your head around it. But there's also a broader context, a legal and regulatory context in which we operate as leaders and as companies. Gulshan, I was hoping maybe you could give us a bit of a sense of some of the things that are changing in our context, in particular from a legal and regulatory perspective.
So it takes three things to drive change and reduce social inequality. So firstly, you need the government policy to set the benchmarks, and then you need organisations to introduce procedures and policies, and then you need organisational culture to make it happen. So a good example of that is paid parental leave. So the government introduced 18 weeks paid parental leave for the birth mother, and I had to look it up because it's been 15 years since I needed paid parental leave. It's become a lot more generous since then. But currently the government offers 18 weeks paid parental mother, and they give 2 weeks, I think they call it dad or something for the men. 2 weeks for the men, 18 weeks for the women. And then companies introduce their own policies because they want to be the employer of choice. So Commonwealth Bank, we have 18 weeks of paid parental leave that's gender neutral. So male or female, whoever gave birth, gets it. And then you need the culture to make it acceptable. So for a long time, I know when my children were small, I always had to take leave when they were sick because my husband didn't feel comfortable. It wasn't as acceptable. But what we're seeing now, particularly in my workplace, is that men are taking the 18 weeks and sharing it. So one will take time off and then the other will take time off. So we've had a few new changes in laws that came into effect this year. We've had amendments to the Sexual Discrimination Act, which puts positive obligations on employers to eliminate discrimination in workplaces. And we've had the first year where there's been reporting of the gender pay gap in all companies with over 100 employees. So it'll be interesting to see how those policy changes are then going to translate to changes in our workplace.
Thank you, Gulshan. So I just want to draw out one or two things there. One, the importance of changing the culture, right? And we as leaders in the tech industry are the ones who actually are going to have to drive that change, partly through role modeling,
role modeling, right? But also obviously through adapting our policies in order to make it possible for our staff to make those decisions as well. Before we go off this question, I just want to talk a little bit about the gender pay gap analysis. And we had a bit of a chat about this as we were preparing for this. This is the first year that reporting has come out, and it has pointed to some challenges, even potentially in the reporting itself. But I think one of the interesting points that you made is that it actually gives us a really good sense of wherever we are as organizations, where the starting point is, or at least where we are and how we compare. Is that fair?
Yeah. So I think it's definitely stimulated a lot of discussion and attention. I think in some ways it's quite helpful because it makes organisations quite competitive. I know that the 4 major banks were all comparing where we were compared to each other, and I've noticed there's a lot of activity now internally talking about mentoring and sponsorship, because the gender pay gap that they measured and reported on isn't like-for-like roles, so that's illegal to pay men and women differently for the same roles. It's more about that there are more men in the higher paid roles compared to women, and trying to understand why that is and how we can create more equality there.
Right. So another way that we might be wanting to change the anatomy of the workforce, the points that was raised earlier. When we think about doing that, well, what are some of the biggest barriers to achieving diversity and inclusion, in the tech industry or financial services, or just generally? I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. Well, maybe I can start with you.
I think that still that unconscious bias is still around, right? We're still seeing that. We're getting better at it, but it still exists. It exists in our hiring practices. It can manifest in promotion opportunities for women in the workplace, and we do see some of those dynamics play out while we are, trying our very best to improve on some of those. One of the biggest things for me that I certainly see is I think the lack of relatable role models and lack of representation of some women in all different genders within leadership teams. And within payments, the space that I'm working in, this is something that we are actively trying to eliminate and get better at, and really create that balance here in Australia as well as within our teams in Bangalore. So that's something that I feel has been a blocker, has been a barrier, but it is becoming more and more transparent, enabling us to look at how we can actually change some of those dynamics within the workplace, in group payments specifically.
I've got the mic. So it's interesting in technology, right? Back in the day, women wrote code. That was how it went. The first code writers were women. Then, because men were more traditional, and then they came home and the men took over and it became high paying. It used to be about 33% in comp-sci degrees, women and men. And sorry, we're talking about diversity here, but I keep falling back to gender diversity because we have stats on that. I'd like to recognise all the other metrics of diversity, but we don't have the data points on it for me to talk to in a sensible manner. So I keep defaulting to gender, so please, I apologise for that. That's all I've got this time. But what's happened since around when home PCs became a really big thing, the number of women coming out of computer science degrees also dropped. And there's some theories around that being to do with gaming, and that the home PC was given to the boy child in essence, and that girls were pushed out of it. But since then, there's huge drives to get women into tech, right? There's girls who code like a girl, a plethora of them, right? There are really big drives to start getting that, from 5 years old up pipeline into tech roles. But they leave the workforce, the tech workforce in Australia at double the rate of men. So at the moment, we're getting 18% women come out of comp-sci degrees, and then 56% of those will leave within 5 years. And they're not leaving to have babies. I mean, parental leave's got better, but that's not why they're leaving. So if we're not doing something to help keep them in the roles, then we're just missing the whole opportunity anyway of that. It's like a leaky pipeline. It's not actually a pipeline problem, it's just the leaks. But I think there's something else we could do to drive this diversity. And if I were in charge, which I should be, by the way, I would make a movie We need to have some attractor stories about why people should be moving into tech. So if you think Top Gun was a recruitment drive, the US military funded a huge part of that. I think we need to get better at telling stories. Imagine a great movie with some really strong characters who look like all of us out there doing great tech stuff. And this would be the plot twist. I wanted my movie. Those people wouldn't have traditional comp-sci degrees. I mean, the odd one would. But we would be recognising the skills they acquired in other places. So it might be someone who was a really epic gamer, because when you game, you learn how to write some code on the side. You learn how to build a team that you've not met before and make them high-performing, because those first-person shooter games don't give you a lot of scope for like resting and coming back. Or you would look at the parents who took extended parental leave, and you could start kind of recognising skills that are acquired in different ways. Enhance them with some technical stuff on the top, because I think we can learn systems and software and coding. There's a whole group of people with PhDs who learn how to do data analysis in whatever field they were in that we're not using in technology, and Australia's not loving them as researchers either. We could bring all those people over and get them to hang out with us. I think we've got huge opportunities to fix this. We just need to be a bit smarter.
I was going to say, when I finished uni, I did a system engineering course and started working. One of the reasons I left that first job was because I was the only female in an entire team, and I just felt like a complete outsider. Didn't suit my personality, didn't suit what I was doing. So that was one of the reasons I actually left IT for a long time and then made my way back. But totally, yeah, really, really resonated with that. Some of the things that we're doing, certainly in ANZ and payments, is we're really looking at our recruitment processes and practices, right? Ensuring that we have female representation on all the interview panels, and of course ensuring that we're always looking to interview females as candidates where there's obviously, you know, the skill and the background and things like that are there, and leveraging hiring matrices, like looking at capability and really leveraging those capability skills and then making the right decisions there based on that background. So some of the things we're doing.
I might just add, not to be a competitive big bank, but since you keep talking about payments and representation, I sit on the payments LT. We have a male boss, but 7 out of the 8 LT are female, and Combank India in Bangalore has got 50% female, 50% male leadership team, which we have actually not, across the board, which we have not achieved in CBA Australia.
Can you tell us maybe a little bit about how you got there, some of the practices and tactics without giving too much away?
I think they did it in India. Do you mean in the payments team or in? I think some of it was by chance. I always say that all the women in that team actually interviewed for their roles and got them. And in Combank India, I think they had the advantage of starting from scratch. So they recruited from the start with that intention.
Well, I'm interested in what observations you would make about within your teams between here and Australia and some of the challenges that you face here versus in India.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the strategy for us for the next couple of years specifically is around that commitment to look at building our leadership team in women, specifically in Bangalore. Our representation isn't quite as good as Combank's at the moment in payments. However, we are looking at our operating model. We are looking at capability, specifically in leadership, and putting in the right women in the right roles to help flourish and further build out leadership capability in Bangalore. So that is something that we will start to look at within the next year or so in furthering and growing our Bangalore GCC force over there in payments.
Thank you. But I think one of the things I take away from that is that it's not just having the right practice when you have a position to fill. It is a multi-year, medium, long-term planning process that involves succession planning, that involves building up the various skill sets that you need across the entire team, not just within the women, but across the entire team, right?
It's understanding of the the moment, that strategically we need to build that function further. So right now we're at that stage of bringing in the right people so we can build out that workforce to open up further opportunity for people within Bangalore.
Did you want to say anything on hiring practices, or?
I think hiring practices are really interesting. And in my mind, there's 4 steps to this if you want to improve the diversity on your team. And the first, we often skip to step 3, which is hiring. But it's well down the track. Step 1, I think everyone needs to stop and evaluate. You need to look at your company, see what is happening. And I don't think I meant to say this, but actually, maybe some people don't want a diverse team. Like they actually, if they dug right down deeply, they just want a really homogenous group that will just do this one thing really fast right now. They don't want it to be diverse. And maybe that's okay for that little piece of work or that particular team, but don't be kidding yourselves. So sit there, I think step 1 is evaluate. And if you do say, we want more diversity, and this is an important thing to us, and it will give us competitive advantage, and we will get our 3.5% increase in EBIT that you do with every, uplift of diversity in your leadership team, then you need to talk about it, and you actually then need to budget for it. Because what I've seen happen a lot is people go, "Whoo, yeah, diversity, we're going to get more diverse people in here, let's go." And there is no resources given down the chain to help their HR people or their managers set this up. So once you've evaluated and had to think about, do I even want to do this? And if I do, what am I putting forward to actually make this be so? Then you can move on to trying to attract some other people. Because odds are, if you're putting out a job ad for a software engineer and it says you need 10 years of C# and 3 years of this and 8 years of that, you've just got rid of every woman who took maternity leave, right? You've just got rid of them. They're not even going to look. So you need to be sure you're putting in job ads just what it is you need. And maybe you don't need a comp sci degree. I mean, maybe you do, maybe you don't. And then it's really good to put those job ads through some of the really good AI models that go, hey, that language you used was really gender dividing, and people aren't going to apply because they don't feel like they belong here. Also part of attracting is making sure your website is not just full of 50 pictures of people like you. Because no one wants to go and be the first or only person, right? It's lonely out there. It's really lonely. Once you've done all those things, and also I'd say in that you should start supporting community groups of underrepresented people as well. You need to get on the ground because people talk. I know in Melbourne and Sydney, there's a couple of Slack groups and there are a couple of companies on there which I doubt I would see a woman go into a technical interview ever. They're just on this list where you would not go. You wouldn't even waste your time. No one even questions it anymore. So you need to be walking the talk and be aware of community groups. And a good way to hear what's being said in them is to sponsor them. Once you've done all of that, then you can start hiring, right? And that's the piece where you have women on the panel, or don't just have 3 people that look the same who are doing it on gut feel. Actually use some kind of scorecard so everyone's being assessed for the same skills. And those skills should be the ones you want to see in the job, not just stuff you thought you might like. It needs to be really considered. And once you've got that, then you need to keep hold of them. So it comes to that retention piece, right? And the reasons women leave technology are around inflexible work. I think COVID actually helped a bit with that. If it did anything good, I think we're doing okay. Unequal pay, and I know it's illegal to pay different amounts for the same job, but what you often see in technology companies is women are kept on lower job titles. So delivering, for example, at a senior software engineer level, but on a mid-level engineer pay band, and not getting that promoted piece. So they're doing the same work under a job title that's different. And people talk, and there is nothing more frustrating than turning around and going, oh, what do you mean you're on 20k more than me, Steve, and I do more? Like, you're just going to leave at that point. So unequal pay still happens a bit. But the 2 other reasons women leave tech is perceived incompetence and lack of access to promotion. And those 2 are really jarring because it comes back to just not being seen or respected in the workplace. I know I've worked places, I've actually got a maths degree as background, but having to say, hey, I've got this opinion about how we do this thing with some numbers and some models, but then having to say I've got a maths degree and I did 4 years of this crazy stuff first before I was heard, it just is death by 1,000 cuts. It's exhausting. But once you've got that all set up and you've got ERG groups, and if you do have the employee resource groups, particularly if it's a women in tech one, you need a very high level sponsor who is an ally. It needs to be a man there saying, this is important. And it needs to be funded, and the people running it shouldn't be running it in addition to the rest of their day-to-day work. It is a part of their work, and it needs to be respected as work that takes time and money. Pay them money. You can come to me for another TED talk that goes on for an hour, sorry.
One of the things that you mentioned, Gretchen, was data, and I think measurement is something that all three of you have brought up. I'd like to just unpack that a little bit because, when I was at NAB, there was a huge debate about whether setting targets was actually really meant quotas, and there's a lot of noise around that. I think we've moved on beyond that, but actually measurement and measuring the impact of diversity and inclusion initiatives, I think is a useful topic. I'd love to get your perspectives on that.
Yeah, measurement's a big one. It's a big one that's really associated with my role. One of the I suppose, what we've committed to, I suppose, increasing within my space is women in leadership. So we are looking to increase our women in leadership in banking services or group payments by 3.7% this year. And I do believe, half year we're sitting at, I suppose, up by 2.2%, so from last year. So currently we are at about 31% of our women in leadership within the group, which is really good, and we are making some strides towards that. And we've really done quite well in having a balanced workforce across our group. So across geography, between AU and Bangalore, where we've sort of got a 48% of women working within our group, from business analysis all the way up to product owners, to 52% of male spread within our group. So the balance is pretty good there. Now what we want to focus on is that increase of women in leadership and getting those numbers going.
I love the measurement question, and I think WGEA is fabulous and also very, very onerous. Has anyone here had to look at what's in that? It's a whole piece of work. Like, it takes hours and days. And it's a blunt instrument, very, very blunt instrument. I like that it's given organisations a baseline of we are here, so you can set some goals of where you want to be. But I've also seen someone get smacked on the wrist very hard because they're deeply passionate about diversity in their tech teams, and they brought in an entire graduate program and targeted women coming in to make sure they could come and grow and be in their technical teams. But what that did, because it measures the pay gap, is all of a sudden their teams were very, very heavy in junior women. And so it looked bad in the data points because it's just a blunt instrument. It's a good enough blunt instrument to get started with, but I think if you're going to rely on metrics, you need to delve in a little bit. And a lot of organisations I talked to, they weren't the big four banks doing good stuff and competing and trying to move forward. If you're looking at the smaller ones, 100 plus people or 100 to 300 people, they're in a bit of a tricky spot because they don't have as much of the funding to be able to make steps forward. And they got their reporting and they're like, oh, we suck in essence. And then they were just felt like they were told off and didn't know how to move forward. So I think we need to be accepting that maybe we're not where we want to be, but that's okay because we're going to start moving forwards.
And that's the important thing, right, is it gives us a sense of where we are and then allows us to craft a narrative over time about the progress that we're making. So that's I think an important element. Given the title and the overall theme of the conference, I'd like to get your thoughts on how technology itself can actually be used to help improve or promote diversity and inclusion. Maybe, Greg, since you've got the mic, we might start with you.
I'm torn on this one. I think there's a lot of talk around AI reading CVs to take up data and bias. I'm not sure there's a lot of great data sets that do have the data and bias removed so that they're picking up the people that are underrepresented. I might just be being a bit cynical on that one. But I think what technology can do is it can help us write better job descriptions or job ads or do outreach that way. Technology can help us to go through and assess people based on data points and then look at it. But I would be hesitant at using a lot of the AI recruiting models because I'm yet to see one beautifully explained to me. Is that a bit cynical?
Well, and you'd have concerns about transparency or around ultimately how it works, right?
We can just be amplifying the bias as well, and we don't yet have systems built in where we can question what was happening or the outcome that existed. And I think if you look at some of the EU regulation that's coming in, they are saying you need to have explainability for these models, and the amount you need to be able to explain is dependent on how impactful on people's lives that model is. So in terms of getting finance or jobs, you have to really be able to explain what's happening in your models, and I'm not sure we can.
Well, but I suspect that that's actually where a lot of the progress is being made in both understanding and building in transparency and traceability. But that certainly is, given the theme of today's conversation more broadly, one of the concerns or challenges that AI has raised, right? It's the fact that it may perpetuate or reinforce existing biases just due to the bias in the underlying data on which some of the models were trained on. But that's where then training, fine-tuning, and I love the term that was used earlier, precision AI. I think that as we get to the point where we are moving past that nascent sort of early stage, I mean, the transformer was only invented in 2017, right? So it's actually a remarkably young technology in terms of our application of it to different use cases. And in the field of human resources and hiring, there are some areas where it's more helpful and less helpful, right? Yeah. Some things that, certainly, Goshen, did you have a view on AI in particular, or?
Yeah. So I think we were talking about how AI can be used for good. So CBA has had AI has been one of our core strategic priorities for a number of years, and I think we're one of the biggest corporate users. So we were involved in the government's development of the ethical AI principles. So that I know includes fairness and transparency, and I have heard our AI teams talk about explainability. You have to be able to explain your models, because bias in AI can entrench and amplify social inequality, and systems can discriminate in ways that create unfair outcomes for customers. So I guess an example of where AI can be used for good or to assist marginal groups is we launched a model last year that addresses technology facilitated abuse. So when you send a payment, you know this, Luella, you can put in the message a number of characters and you can write a message with the payment. And what we were picking up that was being used in cases of domestic violence for people to put abusive or threatening messages in there, and quite serious examples. And so we were using machine learning to identify, pick up certain words and block it. They were getting around that, so you would see things. It's quite disturbing, but it shouldn't be surprising when you see what's in the news with domestic violence, that people would do things like send $1 and, $1 I, $1 will, $1 kill, $1 you, that kind of thing, and it's amazing how much of that is. So we've been using AI to block those messages, and now it's at the point where they can pick up high-risk cases, and we're picking up about 1,500 high-risk cases annually.
Wow, that's a really powerful example. Thank you for sharing that, Goshen. Because that really brings to life the fact that AI does have this power to, or certainly LLMs have the power to process qualitative data that we often haven't been able to do much as large organizations, or certainly as financial institutions, processing millions of payments a year. The volume was just too much to actually do something useful with it. So now here's an application of the tool in a way that actually can be very helpful. And I suspect that there are other forms of qualitative data that can be evaluated for their inclusivity, if you will, or the threats that they might pose to some subpopulations who might not feel included or be subject to exclusive treatment. So, bringing it back then a bit, when the people in this room go away from this conversation, what do you think that leaders and managers should be doing to better equip themselves to support and champion diversity and inclusion in their teams?
We, as leadership groups and leaders, we need to be role modelling, really. We really need to be role modelling, but fostering inclusivity, demonstrating that in all of our sessions that we hold today. We should be actively promoting women in leadership as well, different genders, and we should be ensuring that inclusivity is the core value of how we work in any of our teams. We should be creating a lot of supportive networks and mentorship programs for our people, connecting them to wider groups. One of the things that we do in group payments, I think we've talked a lot about women in payments and really connecting our members to that so they can learn and grow and they can foster that, cultivating that sort of innovative environment there. Advocating for policy changes in hiring practices. I think we've talked a lot about that. I'm certainly no expert, but really looking at ensuring that we're doing the right thing when looking at bringing in the right people with the right skill set within our group. Thinking up front, what is it that we need, what's going to make teams successful, and looking at balancing out those teams if it's the right thing to do. And challenging your own beliefs. Really just thinking about yourself, how can you learn, how can you grow, and how can you continuously challenge your own beliefs to foster that inclusive and diverse environment.
So I think it's very important for leaders to have regular conversations about the kind of social norms or attitudes or behaviours that exclude or discriminate against people. So I think in Australia it's often quite covert or subtle, and a lot of the times it's unintentional. So having those discussions so that we're aware of our own subconscious bias, as well as holding each other accountable. So at CommBank we've got a program called Respect Lives Here, and we have quarterly inclusion conversations on different topics. And that was designed with Griffith University and the University of New South Wales. And each one has a topic, and it's supported by, sometimes it's videos and it's actual CommBank employees talking about their personal experiences and how it's impacted them, or sometimes it's anonymous verbatims, which is quite powerful. And then we have discussions on how to be an effective bystander so that people kind of have the tools and know what to do when they come across and recognise those behaviours.
I love these very structured answers. I've got some chaos for you. So first thing I think you should do is throw some money at the problem. Right, like seriously, if you want a group for the women to feel supported, throw money at it. Give it money, give it funding, pay people to run it and make it feel okay. If you want to hire diverse people, give your HR team money and time to do it. It needs resources. But aside from that, you can have more fun with this. I know this beautiful man who talks about supercomputing. He's verging on genius. When I hang out with him, he speaks really slowly and smiles a lot to make sure I'm keeping up. And he often gets asked to talk at conferences because he's a headline, right? People will travel from overseas to see him. A few years back, he was looking after 2 PhD students who were doing phenomenal work. And he got asked to speak at a conference, and he'd said yes. And then it turns out the entire conference lineup that went for 2 days was all white men. The whole thing. They just failed really hard on diversity. And so he rang them up and said, "What are you doing?" "I don't want to speak anymore." And they said, "Well, you have to. That's why people bought tickets." And he was torn between having made this obligation, right, and going, "I don't want to be a part of this conference, because if you go, to that conference and speak, knowing what you know, you're endorsing that behaviour. And this is where this man is verging on genius, right? He rings up and he goes, okay, cool. I had a 40-minute slot. Can you make it a 60-minute slot? I'm like, sure thing. We've got our headline. We've got our legend. We are good. We're selling tickets. And so he turns up on stage and he pulls up 2 chairs and he introduces each of his 2 PhD students who are women and their topic. And what he's done then is genius, right? He's endorsing them. He's giving a platform to them. And he's setting them up for success in the future. He just role modeled the best allyship I think I'd never thought of, right? But I think we need to tell these stories of what being a good ally can be and how you can do it. And so go forth, be chaotic, give up your spot on a panel. I mean, I'm not, but you do it. That would be great. So that would be my advice.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. No, that's a really great, tangible example that brings it to life, which is, I think, what's important. I also just want to go back to the mention that was made of groups like Women in Payments or Women Who Code. Right? Those are communities that even if maybe you don't have a lot of women in your organization or in a team right now, that maybe some of your female employees can feel part of and be supportive.
Can I jump in there? I think your EIG groups in your workplace are super important, but the external ones are equally as important, because you can't say all you need to say in the workplace and you can't be supported in all the ways you need to be there. I think you need both. It's not either or.
All right. Well, I think we are coming up on time, so I'm just going to go maybe start with you, Luella. See if there's any last takeaways or insights that you'd like to share with me.
We've got a lot of work to do. We've got a long way to go, but I think we're committed to making that change and really, really looking at making diversity and inclusion a better place in all our workforces. So I think we're getting there, and we'll get there with some mistakes, but we will get there.
I think I'll just come back to the first comment I made on this panel, that diversity is not just about feeling good and belonging, it's actually good for business and adds value to your business.
Yeah, there's 10 years on statistics on that. It does make you more money, so you should do it. Sorry, I get wildly on tangents, which is not good for on a panel. But what I would like you to all head away with is a bit of a challenge. We tend to start listening to the same people talk about the same thing, and I don't think Sam Altman is the person we should be listening to the most in regards to AI and where it's going. Like, he's got some stuff we should hear, but not all of it. I'd like to challenge you all to start listening or finding different people or different voices in the area. And Temnit Gebru is a really good one, or Joy Balgali. If you Google the poet of code, you'll find her easier than spelling her name. They have some really good different perspectives on what's happening. And I think if we just start hearing different voices and thinking about what they say, we're going to start moving in the right direction and make more money.
Ladies and gentlemen, I couldn't say it better than our fabulous panelists have today. So please put your hands together. Thank them very much.
I do want to mention one thing. I think she did mention about being chaotic. We'll take the lead from here, and this was not planned, and I don't know how he will react to that, but as a chair for the ICT, for all the women on this panel and the other panels, let's have a conversation to make you a member of the ICT. It doesn't have money, by the way.
He didn't really listen, did he?
Yeah, I mean, he has to listen to that a little more. But on a serious note, this is something which we will discuss right after this. And I think we will add more value by driving this as an example ourselves, because this is the most important piece which we put right in the center of the conference as well. So thank you for being so candid. And I think this is also an opportunity for us, for all the women on the panels, for us to discuss which sector you can join, and I'll discuss with them offline. Thank you. I request Sue to join for the next panel. Warwick, Mr. Ranjit.
That's going to be a hard act to follow.
Thank you very much. I don't know how to wrap up this session because it was fantastic just listening to everybody else from session 1 and 2. But thank you very much to ANZ India Business Chamber for having all of us and talking about topical topics. I think everyone's very well aware that Gen AI has just changed the dynamics of the environment, the way we work, the way we need to do work, and the way we need to think about the future. So I guess it's a good segue into where we are going for the next topic, which is really about the regulatory environment and how we should be mitigating risks and managing the future around AI, data, as well as the legal environment. Some of the interesting points we'll be talking about refers to what has been done, what can be done, and what should be done. And how do we close the generational gap on skills, roles, and jobs as well going into the future? How do we mitigate the challenges that we would be facing, and what needs to be changing in our environment? How do we embed different governance processes as well as enable that within our structures and ensure that organizations are ready for the future? How do we also manage diversity, operating models, the hiring processes, and the different practices, all different topics that were discussed earlier on in the previous sessions? And we should be sort of getting ready now for the next 10 years and what Gen Zers and Alphas will be bringing into the workforce. So with that, I would like to thank Warwick for joining us. So Warwick is currently the CDO. Sorry, just a second. Apologies for that. Warwick is currently the CDO and CTO with decades of experience in designing, building, and managing complex global data. He also manages multilingual master data management systems, identity resolution, and data supply chain systems. This brings in new best-in-class solutions and integrates third-party platforms for major corporations in North America and Asia Pacific. He is currently known as the Chief Data Geek, also the CDO and CTO of Compliance Data Lab, which is headquartered in Tokyo, Japan. I'd also like to introduce Ranjit, who's actually been a naval commander in a previous life, is that right? And so from there, he's worked for over 20 years, I think it is, within the military service and has transitioned into digital transformation, business processes, various types of vendor management, as well as improving customer experience measures. He's currently based in New York, so we're very grateful to have him here in Australia. And as we know, Chetan is the chairman of ANZIBC and will be joining this panel discussion. So to open this session, some of the things I'd like to talk about refers to a few things we mentioned in the earlier session, which is how do we foresee the role of humans in the loop in emerging technologies? I might pass that to you, Warwick.
Thank you, Sue. I really relate to what Gretchen was saying before about being number 3. We're panel number 3, so we've got to try and find something original to say on these. But my perspective is more as a user of AI or as a consumer of AI in the businesses that I've been associated with. So I'm a data guy, and the data guys, people who are doing MDM, data warehousing, all that sort of good stuff, we're always under a lot of pressure to use these new toys, because people look at the huge database and they say, yeah, I'm sure we can AI our way out of this one. And one of the things that we have discovered, like in my most recent experience at the NFL in the US, was that it's not as easy as that. So the first thing I had to teach my colleagues about at the league in the US was not about technology, it was not about any of this stuff, it was about, and I think it was touched on before, but the explicability of AI. The thing that we had to teach them was that the
and I think Kieran touched on this, it's about the value you're actually getting out of the AI. The goal with identity resolution, the goal with all the data matching we were doing, the MDM we were doing, I asked my team and my leaders, what is the success criteria? What is successful? What are we trying to do? And they would think really hard, and that was how accuracy. I mean, AI can give us accuracy, and we were using, it was generative AI, and it would give us 98.6% accuracy, and I said, that's all great, but it's completely wrong. The measure of success in an identity resolution system, and therefore a data management system, is defensibility. And the story that I would tell, so Roger Goodell's the Chief Commissioner of the NFL, so we would tell this hypothetical story that one day he would drag me, my boss, and my boss's boss, the SVP, into his office and say, my niece got accidentally matched to an 87-year-old guy in Texas. Explain why that happened. And the answer will be, well, we use this AI, and it's really fantastic, and it's right 99.8% of the time. It's perfect. And he'd say, why did it happen? And we'd say, well, we don't know. Yeah, I did it. And his next thing will be turn it off. And so that investment will have been written off. And so for us, it's the ability to explain and the ability to make sure that when you are harnessing these new toys in the data environment, that you're actually doing it in a way that is concentrating on the answer you're trying to deliver, the problem you're trying to solve, and also, again, that explicability, the fact that you can actually explain what you're trying to do.
Yeah, Archie, I don't know whether beyond baby boomers, was there some statistics? Okay.
I was just thinking that whether you had statistics around beyond baby boomers, because that's where I come from, looks like it. I'm bringing up the age diversity thing here. But here's what I think. The humans in the loop is essentially to keep fine-tuning what AI can do. Someone did speak about CX, customer experience, and how that is hugely impacted by the way in which generative AI is being used. Let me give you the example of what's really happening in my company. We have got around 3,000 people across the globe, humans in the loop, who are actually trained to become prompt engineers, but they come from the domain. What I mean by that is, these people are not software engineers, they are not big data engineers, they're not the people who have actually built the models. These are the people who are actually training and ensuring that the compliance piece and the governance piece within the way in which these tools are being exploited can actually yield the results. And I'll give you an example that the best people who actually can drive customer experience are the people who have actually done it for 10, 12 years. Whether it's in the banking industry, whether it's in the tech vertical, whether it's in telecom or wherever it is. And that's exactly what's happening with companies such as ours, where we're not using it in the open AI fashion. It's knowledge bases internal to the company and internal to the process itself. And how best to actually get to a resolution and get to the result is best known by the humans in the loop. And that's, I think, the key to making it work and making it work ethically and ensuring that the governance piece is all put in place.
Thanks, Ranjit. I think it is a combination of what you do with data and leveraging AI and governance to it, which is human in the loop. We all fly in planes. Would you expect a pilot to be sleeping and using AI only to land you? There's a human in the loop. We all have had examples where somebody has had some surgery or the other. There's a robotic surgeon, but there's a human in the loop. Otherwise, it will not work because you need that human intelligence. It's only going to give you what it has from the past. It will not give you what you need in the future. All of those, if you're in a submarine, like the gentleman sitting next to me, you're underwater and something goes wrong, it's a human in the loop which will get you up there to breathe. The technology can actually fail, but the governance around it is so critical. as we use technology and data, I think it's as good as the human in the loop to make decisions for the future, because the technology has a reflection from the past. Artificial intelligence means generative artificial, and in my opinion, it is going to be very critical as we use the education sector, as we use the training sector, as we use the data. Rubbish in, rubbish out, crap in, crap out. But human intelligence will add true intelligence to make it work. So I think over the course of time, we will evolve with it, but based on the sector, we're going to have an investment to deal with some of those banking, payment industries, healthcare. Probably we'll have more investments because the criticality of that is far higher as compared to maybe driving a driverless car, which, I mean, can be expensive if it goes wrong, but fundamentally you'll still be alive. So I think it'll evolve, but it's going to be the core of what we do every day, and it's going to become more complex, and how we govern it, to your point, will be very critical, because the bad actors are going to use it worse as compared to the good ones who are trying to do real justice to the society in all the sectors.
And just continuing with this dialogue, you know that operationally, and I come from an operational background, not so much a technology background. Operationally, if you look at assembly lines, and if you look at the history of the way in which operations has been run, whether it's in the military or whether it's in the city streets, failure mode effect analysis, FMEA, it's something which I think is a lost art because of the fact that we are so dependent on machines. And FMEA as a service is really human in the loop, because it's the humans who are continuously looking at what can go wrong and looking at the way in which those corrections can be put in place. So I think there's huge opportunity, which is the last word over there, on these kind of things. Fraud detection as a service, FMEA as a service that requires the human in the loop.
It's interesting that you mentioned those points. Yes, humans are definitely needed, but I'd like to circle back to obviously a cyber and AI incident that happened a few years ago in 2016 when Microsoft launched their Tay chatbot. What went wrong? And in saying so, do we think there are enough standards and comprehensive regulations when we actually start to produce these products, taking that in mind?
How are your specialists?
I'm going to channel my previous career as a lawyer, and interestingly, I practiced as a lawyer for a short time, but left because I was told authoritatively that this computer stuff was never going to take over and we're never going to need it. You're wasting your time. I think that the regulation side of this is going to have to mirror what, I mean, we've had a lot of discussion on this already today, so I won't rehash that, but the regulation side of this, I think, is going to have to mirror two things. There's the regulation you use to advance AI and the regulation you use to manage it or to regulate it. The advanced AI stuff is very interesting. It's very inconsistent internationally, which causes me great concern. So my company is based in Tokyo. We have a couple of people here in Australia. I've worked basically in every country except Australia. I've never really worked here, but we are seeing very piecemeal, very different approaches to the cyber side of things. So, for example, in Japan, they recently passed a law saying that the data used to train AI models is automatically free from IP. It cannot be controlled by copyright. So we still don't know what that means, because that is completely at odds with the way that it works in the rest of the world. So there's that sort of patchwork problem of that part. And then there's, of course, the fact that the regulations are going to have to start to mirror the sort of things we're seeing in GDPR and in the Privacy Act here. And in the, we even see like legislation like this in China, for example, in Malaysia, it's a bit all over the place. But where you've got regulation to protect data, people's PII or SPII, the regulation to protect AI in most of these markets, with the possible exception of Australia, is 5-10 years behind that. And as the guys were saying in the first panel, these things are changing on a 12-month basis, like radically changing on a 12-month basis. These LLMs are flavor of the month this year, but it'll be something else next year in the Gen AI space. So I think the real problem isn't what the legislation is, it's the fact that it is so far behind where we need it to be, at least in the markets that I operate in, that's the thing that gives me concern, that even if we fixed it all tomorrow, these changes are happening so fast that they won't be able to keep up.
You know, I got some research done. Yeah, I think it's the known value of ransomware attacks between 2019 and 2023. 2019, $220 million approximately from the known public records. It says $220 million was what was paid to the ransomware, the people who demanded the money. By 2020, when COVID struck, it had gone up to $905 million, which means that as people started working from home, the amount of ransomware attacks increased hugely. And in 2024, it's like $1.1 billion has been demanded. And not everything is reported actually. So you can imagine that this could easily be double that. If you look at the average weekly cyber attacks, it's grown from something like 10,000 attacks on, depending on the sectors, to as much as 30,000 attacks every day. People are, the firewalls and the perimeter security is constantly being bombarded by these cyber attacks. If you look at what's been the fines that have been imposed, GDPR included, very, very large search engine company, don't want to name it, 220 million euros. If you look at a very large app that we all use, just because of data breach, almost 225 million euros was actually paid as fines. A very large database company, 147 billion consumers' data was actually penetrated, $575 million paid as fines. This goes on and on and on. It includes large retailers, large online marketplace, etc., etc. 84% of the breach has been occurred due to a human error, a human fallibility. Someone spoke about it in the first panel, that it is this whole element of gullible human behavior, social engineering and phishing. That's what has led to a large portion of these fines. So the fact that in the first panel they talked about training and talked about education and educating the workforce. For example, Sutherland, we've got 55,000 employees, half of them working from home. The biggest change that has come about from an operating model perspective is that our training modules up front are all about what social engineering is all about, what phishing is all about, what they have to be careful on. And I can tell you a story about how a very large carrier had some of the data leaked. 300 of my employees got a link to basically say that their shift has been changed. Click on this link, put your user ID and password, and they were obviously very worried that how come my shift has changed. Some of them were gullible enough to fall for that. The Trojans came through that open port, and it completely compromised a whole lot of databases. It took us a lot of time for us to solve that. Now, if you look at it, a lot of this is not reported. And so this whole aspect of being able to be able to communicate within the between clients and ourselves and others, and be able to collaborate to solve this issue is what I think the whole thing is right now. And many of them would not want their names to come in the news media, so we don't file police complaints. Today, the laws in several of these lands, we have the cyber criminal the regulatory bodies, where you can actually file complaints against individuals where these kind of leaks take place, and they will protect the secrecy. And that's the regulation which I think is most important while solving the crime. So I think that many of the countries are adopting this kind of regulatory environment where it's become that we can actually go and report, we can file criminal cases and solve for these kind of individual breaches.
So my thinking is that I think 50 years back, banks used to keep gold of us, ours, with people with guns protecting our money. Paper money, gold money. Same problems, but they didn't have access to the banks because the responsibility was of a bank or a financial institution to save it. 20 years later, we went to tellers, the gold became less and the currencies came into picture. But we still had tellers and you had people walking away with cash and somebody stealing that cash. So the banks had to protect themselves, but we were transitioning into protecting ourselves because somebody's watching us physically. There were no cell phones, no digital, no nothing, but they're trailing you to make sure, and you were protecting yourself. The big ones were protecting with additional guns around you, but the smaller ones were still carrying a little bit of cash in their pocket. Fast forward 20 more years today, it's all digital. The roles have changed. And those roles have changed in a manner where banks don't have guards, banks have firewalls, financial institutions have security systems, cyber attacks still happen. The threat has not changed, it has gone exponential because you can actually be a threat sitting anywhere in the world today. Earlier, you had to actually go to a physical bank and take out gold, and you could have been shot. Here, you can't be shot because you can shut your laptop and still move away with the money. However, in my opinion, to what Ranjit and Warwick says, the regulations have to be faster, but I also believe that the technology is changing phase faster. Earlier, the teller to a back-end money transfer has taken 20 years. The developers took 2 years. Today, that 12 months tomorrow could be 10 days because AI will start developing that software, which is evolving technology in itself, which is not far away in my opinion. But catching up with the regulatory requirements to prosecute the ones which we catch is something which we will need to think through as industries, countries, and organizations to build things where it can't go wrong possibly. But I think that's one area of focus for the education industry. Universities, schools, they need to introduce more courses of cyber. We have paucity of these experts in the industry, men, women, anybody, right? I don't think we find enough people to protect and build those cyber secure and policies and law. I think that's one area of focus across industries is required, especially from the regulatory and governance standpoint.
Yeah, it's very important. I mean, as we go into a new era of, technology, operating models, and just utilizing data, definitely there's a huge piece around engagement as well as in education, literacy, all of that. But it brings to an interesting point, which we all know in Australia we've had, at least 3 major breaches in the last 18 months. One of them has recently been, but has recently come to light in terms of not really taking cybersecurity seriously. I won't name them. When it comes to cybersecurity, my question is around, first of all, how do you sort of foresee these threats? And second of all, who really should be accountable for this? Because we're saying we need to enable the organization, we need to support the organization, but who's actually going to be accountable for that? And then prevent such basic issues from taking place when actually it could have been covered in a much more seamless way.
Again, more as a consumer of AI and as a member of teams that have worked with it, we do know that it's all very well to, let me give an example. There has been a case in America, a very big case, which is in the news, and it is not actually being set up as a cyber breach. And for anyone who's from the States, the antitrust actions against Ticketmaster are a very interesting case in point, because the reason this was triggered was because of the whole Taylor Swift thing. You know, the Taylor Swift thing went on sale, the system went down, everyone complained, and it was considered to be a disaster. The reason the system went down was because they were undergoing cyber attacks, the most massive cyber attack of any retail site at the same time, because someone decided, well, screw it, Taylor Swift's going, so we're going to bring these guys down. So that's a classic case of someone being held accountable because they desperately wanted to shoot somebody because there was something that happened, but it wasn't actually holding people accountable for a cyber breach. You mentioned the Medicare thing. You know, we had 9.7 million breaches effectively. Each, under the old regime, it can carry $2.2 million fine, so it's like a several $1 trillion fine technically if they were prosecuted. Ironically, and you see that in the news because it makes great headlines, but OAC, the body that oversees this stuff, who had like 1,800 breaches reported last year, have actually said, and there was some fairly contentious hearings in the Parliament on this, have actually said they're not. The aim is actually not to fine people and to prosecute. The aim is actually to change the behaviour and to actually help businesses deal better with this stuff. So, when you ask the question who should be held accountable, I think the process of holding businesses accountable, the process of actually coming back to individuals to hold them accountable, the process of understanding that a lot of this happens because of social engineering of employees, of these things is fine, but it's really going to be more about what do we do to educate these businesses, and how does that enforcement process produce a better result, not just produce things that transfer liability away from the company and to the employees or to the contractors or to somebody else.
Yeah, I think I would like to basically tell a story which kind of will highlight who's responsible. It so happened that we got a contract with a born digital Silicon Valley company. In lighter vein, I went in my suit and they were in their shorts at the time when we got this business. So I realized what the whole thing was. And there were these people who obviously had built their business on a lot of openware. And one of their requirements was that all our employees should be on the same messaging platform as the one that they were using. Now, our CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, he said, no, that's really vulnerable. We cannot have our employees on that platform, and I would strongly recommend you should be also not using it for business purposes. The two CISOs, they had a splitting match, and at some point of time we got the whole thing written in black and white. They were very, and there were other vendors who were also servicing them, and they would say, look, they're already on that platform. What's so great about Sutherland that you guys think that you know everything about information security and vulnerability? You won't believe it, 2 weeks from that time, they got shut down because that platform had the vulnerability, and someone came in and all the servers wiped out all the data. The other vendor also was down for 3 weeks or so till they were able to revive the thing. And that's when, as an operational person, I was complaining that my CISO was being extremely harsh. And possibly we would lose this business because of this element of being, so intransigent about allowing this. But later, I realized that there are these standards which companies like ours would have, and many of the other companies, and that there's a reason behind it. And I think you learn it the hard way. So the point I'm making really is that you have the governance models, you do have your policies, you stick by a lot of that, and ensure guardrails are put in place. And I think that you protect yourself as much as possible. And the responsibility of these kinds of, vulnerable situations has to be with us, if at all, we allow these Trojans to come in and things like that.
my opinion, I think to your question, responsibility and accountability, I don't have a direct answer to that, but you can figure out, fish around it, and there won't be any wire of ransom in it. Ability to respond is responsibility. Ability to account means the makers of technology will have to ensure that they have proper governance to build it, although that may not be enough because the technology is evolving. The users of technology have to have the ability to respond like users like us, and make sure that when 20,000 times people say don't click on this link, don't go and experiment it, because somebody said don't click on this link, it will get to your bank account and wipe it out. Try it. If it does, I mean, you just proven yourself right, or somebody else right. So the responsibility, in my opinion, sits with the users like us, all the organizations serving the customers, the end consumers for retail, for pharma, for healthcare, for people who use apps, and provide that inputs back to the organizations and the builders, because there's always a feedback loop, it says. If something goes wrong, tell us. That's the responsibility of everybody sitting in the room, outside the room. Somebody's unwell, taking a medical treatment. It is our responsibility to make sure the builders of the technology are accountable to solve for all of these things which will happen. Because in the middle of it, the more responsive people are the bad actors. They've figured it out how to navigate the FMEA example. I think it sits with everybody. And in my opinion, there's not a right answer that who's accountable for it. It's a joint one across three sectors: builders, users, and us.
I was just thinking about it. The larger data breaches and the fines and ransomware that gets all the press. But equally, you will find that there are petty cyber crimes happening all the while through phishing and other social engineering means. That also needs to be plugged. And I gave you the example of someone who's so lackadaisical about usage of let's say technology, which is proven to be vulnerable. On the other hand, there are these people who are extremely conservative and not ready to use technology which can actually protect us. I'll give you an example. In the world of customer experience, in banking, in payment cards, in claims, in such places, you will find that the systems which have been built 10, 15, 20 years back has all the information available. So let's say someone sitting at home and doing a transaction related to cards has got all the 16 digits and the CVV and everything available in the tool. And someone talked about masking, and that masking technology is available today, but the CIO of the organization is not ready to allow a third-party technology to come in and help with this issue. Then you're automatically making yourself vulnerable for, it could be $500, $1,000, $2,000, whatever it is, being lost to cybercrime, but 10,000 of that every day in different parts of the world. And I'm just saying that, these things, there are technologies available, people don't want to use it, don't want to change their systems, and we get into trouble.
I would also ask the open question that with a lot of this stuff, let's say that companies put in advanced cyber training, and there are lots of courses out there. My little company uses one, but is the goal of that training to, I wouldn't say prevent attacks, as the other panels have mentioned, this stuff is inevitable, but is it to mitigate the effect of the attack, or is it to reduce liability? And I think the training that I have done, that I have been involved in for 20 years, because I've worked in very big companies, has largely been couched in terms of saying, we have fulfilled these three things that we had to do. We've ticked these boxes to educate our employees so that if anything bad happens, it's not our fault. And I was working for Wall Street listed companies, and so they were very into making sure that they had limited their liability. I would argue that taking that kind of approach to this kind of problem leads to the circumstance that you've just described.
Thanks. Very interesting points being made there. And so I would say that in that light, with some of the issues that we have to foresee, how do you think then Gen AI or AI in general could be used as a solution to actually address these gaps?
I'll give you a use case where, very similar to the example that I gave earlier, and we've actually built it. We had a gentleman here who had a company that does sentiment analysis on voice and on face and things like that. He's left us right now. But Sutherland, we have deliberately built, using Gen AI, a layer that sits on top of all the transactions that are being done in real time to look at patterns. And I'll give you a simple thing. If you find that repetitive requests for a credit card number is happening, red flag. And that kind of a pattern recognition using AI has helped us. There could be some false positives, but it helps to mitigate very fast that a cybercrime likely to happen can be actually stopped. Long pauses during the transaction, we have noticed is real reason where potentially an agent is actually memorizing or writing down some of the those 16-digit numbers and so on and so forth. So I think there is potential for AI to be used in such pattern recognition for early detection of these kinds of behaviors.
Yeah, I was just, that was actually just making me remember something that again, we used to do at one of the companies I was working with, where we were looking for fraud patterns. And these guys were actually using, again, AI to combat these things. And the thing that they taught me was the thing that the AI taught them, which was that the best way, this was B2B fraud, corporate fraud. The AI had taught them that the clearest indicator of a fraudulent business was one that was completely symmetrical. In other words, it was a business that was doing everything at the exact time. And this is something that, of course, people, because of our biases, hadn't picked up, because we would go, well, that looks like a great company because they put in all their tax returns. But they found that the pattern recognition that those things could do in the fraud space, which I know that I'm not directly answering the question because it's not actually cyber attack stuff, but yeah, the fraud space was quite amazing.
Follow the money. Everyone says follow the money. Use AI to follow the money.
This was a case where it was absolutely pristine. Like there was nothing that a person would pick up. It was just that the pattern was too clean. And then obviously the AI used mathematical data to correlate that back to the likely results, like the fraudulent results.
So I'm going to give a different example. This has become very serious and very complex. So if I was a bachelor driving a car in Melbourne, which I am, no, I'm serious, and I have the girlfriend sitting next to me in the car and I'm using AI, and I tell the system saying, and the AI, this system does not know that she's sitting next to me, and saying, get me the best flowers for my girlfriend. And it starts asking, which one? The Australia one, the India one, the Europe one? Hold on, not this one. Oh, okay, the lilies or the jasmine. Oh, hold on. And 30 seconds later, I have an airbag open on my face because she just said, oh my God. And I said, no, this was not the right person you were talking to because I had a cough and it assumed somebody else. But I'm close to death. Or maybe died. But on a serious note, generative AI, in my opinion, is an enormous, enormous capability for us, saving lives, in making sure that the facial recognition is in such a manner that no bad actors can figure it out because you've done it and protected it yourself. It allows you to lift and drop things from A place to B place where you're giving medical supplies in a zone where it is been hit by a pandemic. It allows you to go and introduce medicine, which took 10 years to test, and now it can do that on many, many, many runs because it has generative in it. But it also needs governances, compliances, and make sure that the right people with the right qualification are doing the right thing for the right reason. And that's a complex equation, in my opinion, which will always remain open because you'll always have that conundrum between the balance of when to say stop, don't test it, or when to say let's produce it.
If I can be permitted to build on that, to go off on a little tangent, because this was something that actually occurred to me in the last thing, something that Gretchen was saying about making sure that your hiring processes are looking at the totality of all of the skills that you really need, as opposed to replicating what you already have. I actually think that cybernetic nature of AI, its ability to augment us, sort of multiply what we do, could very conceivably in the very near future turn into a despecialisation of our skill sets. So rather than, I think we've definitely reached that peak, and we talked about it before, you have analyst, programmer, and then tester, and all that sort of stuff, and now we sort of have data engineers, and we talk about engineering, and I'm deep into all that stuff, but imagine if you have an AI that can do a lot of the very technical computer science type things and actually write the code for you, then what are the skills you're looking for? You're looking for someone who can problem solve, looking for someone who can detect problems like with what they're seeing, and someone who's creative. And those are skills that are very generic, and they're skills that are not gender specific, and they're skills that if we're looking, if we're starting to focus on those as opposed to saying, well, yes, you need to have had a combined 35 years of experience in, databases, and you've done a computer science degree, and you've got a PhD and all that sort of stuff. Well, the AI can do a lot of that now. And if it really can do a lot of that now, then what am I looking for?
So, I have a little different viewpoint, a tangent on your tangent. Yeah. So, I did a lot of my training on missile technology in Russia. This was maybe 20 years back. And when you have to fire a missile, and that's got a nuclear warhead, you actually need to put a physical key. The captain has to put a physical key, and the executive officer, you must have seen Hunt for Red October. So the two keys have to go in together, and that's the only way you can fire a missile. Now, if that kind of technology is used, and I'm an old-fashioned guy, you won't have doors falling off Boeing aircrafts, right? So, so the point I'm trying to get at is, if you start using AI for testing and validation of mission-critical work, I don't think that's the right use case for AI. I feel that, we still need humans in the loop.
I rest my tangent.
To add to the tangent, so that's actually really interesting, some of the points you've raised around hiring, around using humans within the process, augmenting the human intelligence with the AI. One of the things we do need to note is that 10 years from today, we're going to have even bigger generational diversity. So what are we doing about that? What are we doing about bringing on Gen Zers and Alphas? I mean, what was done for millennials and Gen Xers? And how are you going to build the process of transparency and trust with them? Because a lot of them just give up their data very easily. And so how are we going to start to build or bridge that gap in having regulation, but also protecting them?
I'm not going to answer the question, but I'm going to ask a related one that has been concerning me. So again, I originally come from a professional background as a lawyer, and I was a computer geek as a young lawyer. Of course, that didn't fly, so I left the law. But obviously, since then, things have changed. And I think some of the guys on the first panel were talking about this. That particularly when you're talking about precision AI and your specialist AI in these professions, that's all great. But something that a senior lawyer actually posed to me 2 years ago, so even as LLMs were just starting up, is the biggest problem, he said, that we have is that we don't need junior lawyers anymore, right? We don't need junior lawyers, but we still need senior lawyers. This will be true in accounting, it will be true in medicine, it will be true in a lot of things. If you still need the senior people to have that sort of cybernetic relationship to actually guide the AI, but you don't need the tons of juniors that we've put through these funnels in the traditional days, then what do you do? And I think that's, again, where just because you can replace a junior role with AI, you've got to actually think that some of these people actually have to go on to become the people who are going to effectively employ the AI.
Yeah, I think they're kind of born with the ability to bridge this gap. I'll give you an example of a friend of mine whose 12-year-old son makes $30,000 a month being an influencer in the gaming world. He's got some 200,000 followers, and they're just waiting for the next, words of wisdom to come out of his mouth regarding how to beat the game. So a lot of these people are actually really good at this technology, and I don't think you need to do too much. But I understand your fact about trust, being over-trusting, not being paranoid about things. And so how do we teach them those life skills? Possibly, I think you fall and you learn, and you got to learn the trust, I guess. Yeah.
I think awareness, evolving the education sector to deal with this enormous change. And with this change, I think our ability to be still remaining social. Because with so much of digital and technology, we will in the next 10 years lose touch, human touch, even though you have a human in the loop. But how do you balance that? And it's going to be always the chicken and egg story, probably, because things will happen faster than your education system can evolve. So awareness education and building newer ways of educating these digitally aware kids, if I may, for using that technology more smartly, then allowing them to learn, because it seems they already know it inherently. So probably those two pieces, awareness education, staying ahead of the curve, or what's coming their way as children getting into corporate.
I'm reminded of something which was an experiment done by my company along with another large carrier. And this was about the contact center of the future. And the contact center of the future project was essentially aimed at Gen Zs and all these younger generation people. And the obvious thing was that they don't want to call. So there's not going to be any more call centers. They don't even want to text. So how do we service this, right? And the whole idea really was that where do these people go to find answers? At the end of the day, everyone needs answers. How do I do this? How do I fix that? How do I, solve for a specific technical issue which could be there with a device, whatever it is. And the whole point really was that that's how another channel comes in, which is social media. And to be able to populate social media and the handles of the social media with the right answers, so that they're not getting the wrong answers and doing the wrong stuff, you need people, young people, who know how to build that content, pump that content into the places where other young people go, so that they can get the answers over there. So I think there was this question about, the anatomy of work. That's what's happening, I think. The change that's happening really is that the anatomy of the work is going to be young people lounging in, bean bags and creating content, putting it onto places where other young people go to get the answers, which today older people call and try to find out.
I was just going to add that my son is 16, doing high school here in Melbourne, and his school, he's actually part of a class that actually has a whole cybersecurity class as part of it, and it's done in partnership with business, which is great. So that's the good news. The bad news is, of course, there's always bad news, is that the curriculum is brilliant. The if you like, marketing reason or the economic reason why they created this course is because someone did a look up somewhere and said we're going to be, I think Melbourne and Sydney are going to be 2,000 cybersecurity professionals short in the next 10 years. My problem with that is that, of course, he's 16. He won't become a cybersecurity professional, assuming he did become a cybersecurity for 8 years, say. By then, that industry will be radically different. So look, bless them for having the idea, and actually it turns out what the curriculum leaders are doing is they're kind of taking the theory of it, saying thank you for the money, but then just teaching the kids about sort of the things that you're talking about autonomy, about what the Internet of Things really means, about what hacking really means, all that sort of stuff. So I have some hope, but I also, I do believe that we are, this revolution, as I said, this has been said many times and said today, it's going to create more jobs than it destroys. And I think you're spot on. It won't be us figuring out what jobs, solving the problem for them. It will be them solving the problem for them.
I mean, the courseware seems to be something like how to make a bomb, something like that.
I think we're nearing almost the end, but I did have a last closing question for the panel, which I think will sum up everything that you've just been talking about, which is, at a global level, do you think enough is actually being done around regulation, frameworks, and what we should be thinking about as we enter this new age of AI?
I'm sure you two will have a lot to say on this too, but my answer would be that I think yes, but I don't think it's consistent. And I think, again, when I was a lawyer, one of the problems you have with, say, international law, and you see this all the time, is forum shopping. So we have a dispute, we try and figure out the best market to have that dispute adjudicated in, because we get the best result. I think the danger with some of this stuff is that if you have inconsistent laws, if we don't have a GDPR of cybersecurity, then it's not really a question of whether it's good or bad, it's a question of whether that inconsistency can be used against markets and countries, because the countries are very, they're all about sovereignty and locality, but that's not how the bad guys work. They're wherever they want to be, they're everywhere.
Yeah, my answer would be that I don't think that we have still cracked the code on how to rein in and how to govern and how to, ring fence with these guidelines exist, but I'm not sure that the right amount of legislation, or we haven't yet figured out how can we actually manage this new revolution that exists out here. I know at the time of the Industrial Revolution, or someone talked about the sewing machine and stuff like that, labor laws came into effect, protection of certain elements of work life and so on and so forth. This is uncharted territory, and I must say that I don't believe that the traditional ways of looking at regulations is going to really help over here. I think there's going to be a lot of self-regulation that will be required from corporates, which is the most important thing. And guardrails and checks and balances have to be self-regulated a lot more. That's my point of view.
I think there's a lot being done, and when we were planning this conference, I think one of the things I was doing was talking to a lot of people around, a lot of organizations, the supplier side, the builder side, the user side, and few things came out was a lot is being done, but there's a lot of inconsistency there. There are smaller organizations who cannot afford to go and pump in enormous amount of money to do these things as well. How do we encourage to bring them up to speed as well? So I think there's a lot more to be done, but a lot is being done, and we'll have to continue to do that.
There's actually too much of overhead today in corporates. You won't believe it that at one point of time, many years back, if you had a ISO 9001 certification, that was all that was required, right? Today, this client asks for SOC 1, SOC 2. That client is asking for high trust. This client is asking for, ISO 27001. And I think a lot of consultants are making a lot of money in putting all that in place, but God bless them.
Great, I'm just getting the signal we need to wrap up. Any final closing statements from the panel?
Good.
Yeah.
All good. I think everything that has to be said has been already said. The first panel actually left nothing for us to say. So you saw that we were just shooting the breeze over here somehow. Right? And in fact, all the stuff that I've written down was said in the first panel. So sorry that next time we should go first.
It's the challenge of being last. You have to make an impression. I might just close off with 3 key points. Thank you very much again to the panel. Appreciate all the responses. I think I've learned a fair few things today as well. But the final points are really we need to be able to respond, be accountable not just at one level but at all levels of the organization. Let's prepare for the future and understand the generations that are entering the workforce. And more importantly, we do need to continue to augment and work with AI. It's not just AI on its own, and it's not a matter of can we shut it down? No, we can't. It's a matter of actually working collaboratively with AI where it's a part of your institution, it's a part of your daily life. Thank you, everyone.
That was another interesting session. Thank you, Sue and Barvik, Chetan and Renshit. Thank you for the session. We have now come to the close of this conference today. As I already mentioned, this is the 4th edition of the Chamber's ANZIBC Technology Conference taking place in Australia. In one line, let me thank all the moderators and panelists for joining us today and for your wonderful insights on the technology and the practical side of the technology. And I should say that it was a real story which is happening at the moment. Thank you so much for all of you for spending your time and joining us today. And I should say a couple of names particularly, starting with Mr. Chetan Mehta, who is the chairman of the Chamber's ICT committee. He has put a lot of efforts to organize this event in Melbourne. Thank you, Chetan, for all your efforts. And let me thank Mr. Archie Montier. He is the, as I always mention, the first member of the Chamber for Melbourne. And he is the person coordinating everything for the Chamber from Melbourne. Thanks, Archie, for all your efforts. And let me thank all the committee members, particularly from the ICT sector. And we have some of the members, particularly from India here, and I would like to thank Mr. Ramesh Srivastava. He has traveled all the way from Chennai to participate in this event. And I would like like to thank the sponsors for today's event, and Cognizant and Fortune Wealth Creations Group, and we have Rashesh here. He is also the committee member in the Financial Services Committee. He is basically helping people with the wealth management side. You can just stand up, Rashesh. He is here. Thank you so much for your support. And let me also thank our media partner, Kiv TV, and Srihari is here. Thank you so much. And we have a lot of other dignitaries here, and particularly I mentioned Mr. Vasan Srinivasan from the Australian Mental Health Organization. Let me thank all of you for joining us today, and with this we are closing it, and we have some snacks and some drinks arranged outside. Request everybody to participate and continue the interactions.
Karun. Yes. You're from here or? Oh, no, I'm from Sydney. Okay. What your base? Melbourne? I engaged in interesting. Which year of economics specializing in so we specialize in new market and strategy. So we have a lot of global enterprises come in and